Lord of Mysteries, Mr. Witch and Miss Hunter by author Xian Dian Li. Chapter 26-50. Chapter 26, Commission. At 8 o'clock the next morning, Altair walked down the streets of East Borough. Venada's spiritual state was already much better than yesterday, at least she wasn't frequently triggering provocation during conversations. However, when her emotions fluctuated, she still wouldn't hold back with her words. Coupled with the increasingly cold weather, it was inevitable to have some morning grumpiness when leaving the bed, so breakfast today wasn't very pleasant. Living with a Biander of sequence 8 or higher from the Hunter pathway is really not a good thing, Altair thought gloomily. Vaguely, he seemed to understand something. It wasn't without reason that, despite Venada's figure and looks, no one in East Borough had tried to curry favor with her before, and there weren't even any people living near her home. Before she returns to normal, I should spend more time outside, and gather some information about that artisan. Altair thought this. Although it was a bit embarrassing to admit that he couldn't stay in his own home, given that Venada had already advanced to sequence 7, Altair decided to follow the dictates of his heart. Although we've met several times at Gegran's organization's gatherings and completed a few transactions, I don't really know this guy in real life. I don't even know where he lives or what he's called. Altair irritably scratched his hair. Trying to find an ordinary-looking person who deliberately hid himself in East Borough was as difficult as finding a needle in a haystack. If he wanted to find a mid-sequence Biander who possessed a corresponding mystical item and had countermeasures against various mystical positioning methods, it would be even harder. When Susie came over the night before last, she materialized a portrait for me. It was the artisan's appearance that Ms. Audrey noted down after the battle. However, Susie also warned me that the other party might change his appearance, so the portrait's usefulness is limited. Ms. Audrey gave me this task, and it's probably a test. Leaving aside whether asking her for help would lower my evaluation, it's still unknown if she can freely use large-scale search Biander abilities in such a dangerous place. Backland has at least 10 or more demigods. Altair sat down on a long bench and began to frown in thought. The currently known conditions are that he is short and may carry a large number of mystical items. Mystical items contain Biander characteristics, and great care must be taken when storing them. Certain pathway mystical items cannot be placed together, otherwise, it will affect the item's lifespan. That means this guy is carrying a lot of luggage. Secondly, this guy is a believer of the Mother Tree, the kind who has received multiple revelations from an evil god, so his behavior must have its peculiarities. I remember that Venada's, Heart of the Indulgent Rose, has a side effect. Prolonged use turns one into a monster that only knows how to mate. So, carrying so many mystical items, he must find a way to deal with the negative characteristics. And what believers of the Mother Tree often do, Altair recalled the debauched party in East Borough 2 days ago. That is to say, my main direction of investigation should be to start with the other party's targets for venting lust. Using my network from when I was a bodyguard and private detective, I can ask people to help investigate recent rape cases or heinous murders in East Borough. Altair unconsciously scribbled on his pants with his hand. At the same time, I also need to pay attention to low-grade hotels in East Borough. Since he is on the run, he wouldn't go to large hotels with complete procedures, but would choose to book a room in a small hotel, and continue to prepare for the next target. Then, combining the East Borough map, using these small hotels as the center and the estimated radius of activity, I can circle out the possible range where the other party might be, and then conduct a focused investigation. Altair's mind raced, and within a few minutes, he had a mature plan. He decided to start by tracing the clues left by the other party, gradually narrowing down the possible range of the other party's presence, solving the problem like a real ordinary private detective, rather than relying on Biander methods he was good at, such as magic mirror divination. Because he knew that the Biander abilities he was good at, the other party was probably also good at, and there was a high probability that he used them even better than himself. Even Ms. Audrey can't find this person, so it's even more impossible for me to find him with Biander methods, Altair thought with self-awareness. However, the assassin's essential ability to collect intelligence and the intelligence network accumulated from previous missions cannot be replicated by a few mystical items. With a goal in mind, Altair quickly took action, turning swiftly into the places where several of his informants usually stayed, the Brave Bar, in East Borough. The structure of this bar had not changed much compared to before the war, as if an invisible force protected it from being destroyed by the Fosak airships. Since normal business hours were in the evening, there were only a few people in the bar. Only a young man in an old overcoat and a worn satchel was dozing on the counter. "Good morning, Ian. I've told you more than once that with your current status and ability, you can completely wear better clothes, or rather, you should wear more presentable clothes." Altair greeted the boy, who was startled awake by the doorbell. The boy slowly raised his head, his eyes, narrowed to a slit by the sunlight streaming directly from the doorway, faintly showing red pupils. "Mr. Brewster, it's been a long time indeed." Ian Wright rubbed his eyes and replied with surprise. "We haven't seen each other for a while, have we? Since you commissioned me 3 months ago to investigate information about the Servants Association recruiting employees, I haven't seen you since." "Only 3 months, we often experience longer separations than that," Altair said with a smile. "Let's sit down and talk." "Indeed, but precisely because of that, each reunion is even more precious." Ian Wright reached for a drink on the liquor cabinet, then remembered that the person in front of him didn't like alcohol, so he could only smile apologetically. "Sorry, I can only offer you plain water." "It's all right, I won't be staying long this time. In fact, after asking you to investigate a few things, I have other places to go." Altair waved his hand, stopping Ian, who was about to fetch water. "I want you to compile a list of all hotels in East Borough that don't require identification for check-in, and confirm if any suspicious individuals have checked in recently." "This is very difficult to do, Mr. Brewster." Ian looked troubled. "The definition of a hotel in East Borough is very vague. Sometimes, a guesthouse can be considered a hotel. As long as the owner is willing, it has all the functions of a hotel. If you want to compile a list of hotels that strictly require identification, that would be very easy. Do your best, pay attention to hotels where tenants like to go out in the middle of the night, and prioritize investigating those in remote locations or where murders have occurred nearby in the past 2 days." Altair instructed. "Then, you'll have to pay at least £20. After all, I need to mobilize a lot of people to investigate separately." Ian thought for a moment and quoted a price. Seeing Altair agree, Ian asked curiously, "What are you looking for these hotels for?" "Of course, I don't mean to offend. If you feel it needs to be confidential, then don't tell me anything. If not, I'm very interested in learning about the relevant information. You know, this is a common problem in our line of work." "Is that your meaning or Military Intelligence Section 9's meaning?" Altair asked with a half smile. "All right then, I won't ask." Ian wisely did not continue the topic. "Help me simultaneously broadcast this message to the bounty hunters in other bars." Altair pulled a £10 note from his wallet and placed it on the table. "This is an advance payment. By the way, sir, I have another one of those gatherings coming up soon. Are you still coming?" Ian put away the banknote and asked Altair as if remembering something. "No, my finances are tight recently." Altair politely declined. "Furthermore, I also need you to investigate recent rape cases or murder cases in East Borough, the more heinous the better, and ideally with relevant case files. Of course, I know those bounty hunters can't get these, so I want to inquire with those guys from Military Intelligence Section 9. Those important figures don't often respond to our requests." Ian shook his head. "Even if you do that, and I report your request, they are very likely to reject it because of your identity. Now they have lost a lot of manpower, and in order to maintain stability, they wish there were as few Beyonders like you as possible, so it's difficult to get relevant help. It might even cause you trouble." "All right then, I'll confirm this information through other means. You can go back to sleep, and I hope your business thrives today." Altair wholeheartedly agreed with Ian's point of view. Compared to the churches, members of the kingdom's military were generally hawkish. Although they were not as radical as the Fosak people, their attitudes towards war and unofficial beyonders were equally strong. He inquired of Xian not because he wanted the other party to accept the commission, but to determine the attitude of official beyonders on the matter through his reaction. It seems that to get those case files, I'll have to find that old friend. Altair sighed. I'm afraid only he, as an official beyonder, would have the connections. Chapter 27 was revised many times before and couldn't be corrected, so it's being added here. Walking out of the Brave Bar, Altair glanced at his silver pocket watch and found that it was still early. I'll go to St. Samuel Cathedral now, and say a prayer. Just in case that day's experience has any lingering effects on me. Altair snapped the lid of his pocket watch shut and walked away from the street where the bar was located. Due to no one cleaning it, the sides of the street were covered with drunkards' vomit. Fortunately, the weather was cool now, so the smell didn't spread very far. However, even so, Altair absolutely did not want to step on it, so he used the assassin's beyonder ability to nimbly cross the street. As the headquarters of the Knight Church's Backland Diocese, the St. Samuel Cathedral, located in the center of Backland City, had a magnificent appearance, forming a tripod with St. Wind Cathedral and St. Highland Cathedral. The goddess's teachings did not favor luxury, but unlike the Earth Mother Church, which pursued simplicity, the decorations of the St. Samuel Cathedral still possessed a unique sense of grandeur. The vast cathedral was adorned with various spires, pointed arches, ribbed vaults, and flying buttresses. The design utilized pointed ribbed vaults, flying buttresses, and slender clustered columns to create a light, elongated, soaring sensation. The new framework structure increased the strength supporting the roof, giving the entire building vertical lines, a majestic exterior, and a vast interior space, often combined with long windows inlaid with colored glass, creating a strong religious atmosphere within the cathedral. Altair entered the main door of the cathedral. It was already approaching 10 in the morning, and there weren't many people praying. As the deity who governs the night, the most suitable time to pray to the goddess should be after dark, between 7 and 9 in the evening. Therefore, the night church closed the latest among all the churches, and many believers of the Evernight goddess would come here to pray after their night shifts. However, these things had nothing to do with Altair. He was here to find a Nighthawks who worked there. Although Altair secretly worked as an assassin, he never took assassin jobs under his original identity. Therefore, his record was very clean. He was a freelancer who, as long as he regularly reported to the Night Church, could move freely without worrying about investigations from other churches. Furthermore, because his usual main work was as a private detective and bodyguard, occasionally also working as a bounty hunter, he also had his own intelligence network, convenient for doing things that the authorities found inconvenient to handle. Therefore, he also had a certain degree of cooperation with the Nighthawks. During this time, he met many members of the Nighthawks team, such as Ms. Loretta, whom he wanted to find today. Hello, sister. Altair walked to about 2 meters behind a nun who was wiping a candlestick, stopped, and politely asked softly, "Excuse me, is Ms. Loretta currently in the cathedral?" "Oh, it's you, Mr. Brewster." The nun turned her head, smiled after seeing the visitor's face, and made the sign of the cross 4 times on her chest. "Ms. Loretta should be in prayer room number 3 right now, however, it's not convenient for me to go see her." "Did you two have some conflict?" "No, I'm sorry, that's not something I should be concerned about." Altair asked subconsciously, but he quickly realized his impropriety and apologized profusely. Lowen's social circles advocated subtlety, unlike Intis. Such a direct inquiry into a lady's thoughts, even for nuns who didn't place much importance on similar worldly etiquette, was inappropriate. "No, Ms. Loretta is a very kind and considerate woman, it's just." By the end, the nun's face was a little flushed, and her voice gradually became too soft to hear. "Please go inside and find her yourself, I still need to wipe the candlesticks here." Sure enough, Lolota is still the same. Altair watched the nun leave in a hurry, sighing helplessly. "Although I feel the same way, The fact that Ms. Loretta, as a Nighthawks, also thinks this way always makes one feel a bit uneasy. Altair stopped in front of Lolota's prayer room. The door was tightly closed, and Lolota's prayer should not have ended yet. Altair decided to wait patiently. Interrupting someone else's prayer was a very impolite act. Isn't that Altair? What are you doing here? Are you looking for me? Just as Altair was waiting, an unusually standard Backland accent came from behind him. Although this was already behind the main prayer hall, outside the no loud noise zone, this greeting still seemed a bit abrupt. Altair sighed. Just by hearing that voice, which sounded like talking and singing, he knew who it was. He and Lolota were both friends Altair had met during a previous Nighthawks operation, but some of his hobbies, in Altair's opinion, were even more unspeakable than Lolota's. The reason he, despite knowing Lolota's quirks, still bit the bullet and came to find her, was precisely because he really didn't want to meet this person, not because he disliked him, but because he was difficult to face. I'm sorry, Britain, I'm here for Lolota, there are some things I'd like to ask her. Altair turned around and, biting the bullet, spoke to the other party. The Nighthawks in front of him was a handsome middle-aged man with neatly combed black hair. He had a high nose bridge and distinct features, like a man who had stepped out of a classical work of art. Actually, I'd prefer if you called me Peter. Britain said with some disappointment. What do you need Lolota for? Can't you ask me instead? That way, she'll have time to go find the coffee shop maid, and I'll have a chance to spend more time with you. What a direct expression. You know, I always feel that compared to a Loan gentleman, you're more like those bards from Intis with ornate feathers in their formal wear. Chapter 27, Investigation. The goddess only teaches us to be loyal in love, but she doesn't specify the identity of the other person. I believe true love, like music, transcends status, position, and even species. Britain elegantly brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. Honestly, I think you artists should all get your heads checked, more or less. Altair suggested sincerely. That's a hurtful assessment, but not as hurtful as your previous rejection. Britain showed an exaggerated expression of loss. This pain makes me want to recite poetry. Ah, her flowers bloomed overnight. Stop, stop, stop right there. Altair waved his hand irritably. Suddenly, he regretted coming here today. To be honest, he would rather argue with Veneta for a day than face the pursuit of an enthusiastic man. Before being promoted to Sequence 8 Midnight Poet, Britain was an excellent violinist with considerable musical talent, which is why he advanced so quickly on this pathway. He was also an outstanding person, but his passionate pursuit gave Altair a severe headache. A red gloves who liked maids and a senior deacon with strange fetishes, Altair suddenly wondered what kind of people had infiltrated the goddess church's Nighthawks. But you actually understand Ms. Lolota's hobby. Altair was a little surprised. I thought no one could understand her idea that maids bring peace to the soul. Perhaps as fellow members who are not understood, I can comprehend this forbidden emotion. Ah, unattainable love is like sweet poisoned wine. Britain sighed, pressing his left hand to his chest as if chanting. I can't understand it. As a normal male, when a female holds my arm, I only feel a rush of distracting thoughts. Altair shrugged. That's because you are still inextricably trapped in the shackles of the basic concept of love. Britain said excitedly. But in reality, more than these things, we should focus on the clash of spirituality, the sublimation of love, and the deeper things like the intermingling and resonance of two lonely souls. Instead of focusing on those foolish lumps of flesh and fat, why not join me in appreciating marble-like physiques and fourth epic-style muscular bodies? Seeing Britain getting carried away, Altair's hand was already in his pocket, gripping his revolver, ready to give him a gun butt to calm him down. However, just then, the prayer room door opened, and a black-haired lady with a slightly angry expression emerged. She had a good appearance. Having just come out of the prayer room, she wasn't wearing a hat and was dressed in an outfit similar to a male butler's uniform, consisting of a black vest, a white shirt, black tight trousers, and matching leather boots. However, her face was currently consumed by anger for some reason. As I was praying just now, I heard someone chanting poetry outside and knew it was you. Lolota said aggressively to Britain. But how dare you say that is useless flesh? That is a symbol of maternal radiance, a common dream for men and women. When you lie on the legs of a maid wearing white stockings down to her ankles, isn't the enjoyment brought by the sweet scent emanating from that perky maternal symbol hundreds of times better than men's crude muscles? HMPH, superficial. Britain snorted. That kind of inherently soft flesh is not enough to carry the noble aspirations of a Beander. We aspire more to the robust physique of a knight, emotional resonance with art, and more elegant things. A knight's physique. Are you perhaps deliberately elevating the value of knights because you accidentally became a nighthawk and couldn't inherit your family's knight title? Lolota sneered. Wake up, the era of knights is over. But an artist's heart never dies. We always pursue what we don't have, just as you pursue ample bosoms. Britain was not to be outdone, retorting. Neither of them would back down, glaring at each other, the atmosphere tense. Seeing this, Altair had a premonition that today might be a wasted trip. All right, both of you take a step back. Altair sighed. Although the hallway behind the prayer room had good sound insulation, discussing such topics casually in the headquarters of the Church of the Night Goddess would likely lead to the nuns outside wielding silver candlesticks and chasing us out. On issues related to such positions, there can be absolutely no concession. Lolota and Britain retorted in unison. Don't be so stubborn about such strange things. Altair's mouth twitched. If I couldn't beat you too, I might force you to see a psychiatrist. I heard Emperor Rosal invented a device that could correct cognition through mild electrical stimulation. Altair adjusted his breathing and continued to persuade. We can discuss your personal preferences later. For now, I'd like to ask you to help me get some case files. You can just use your Nighthawk's identity to retrieve them from the police station. Files from the police station. Lolota's expression softened slightly. Then it's not top secret stuff. It's not impossible to get them for you. However, the weather has gotten colder recently, and I don't really want to go out. After saying that, Lolota yawned slightly. After all, I'm a corpse collector pathway, not a sleepless. If you are willing to come out and help me get copies of the materials I need, I will treat you to an annual pass at Salma Cafe in Hillsden Borough. With the annual pass, you'll have a private room in the cafe with good lighting and heating, free enjoyment of all the freshly baked desserts from the cafe's pastry chef, and a maid who will attend to you throughout your use of the private room, offering lap pillow and ear-picking services. Altair leaned close to Lolota's ear and whispered. And the most important thing is, the average bust size of those maids' uniforms is. In an instant, Altair seemed to see green light burst from the suddenly wide eyes of the lady before him. How do you know of such a place? Lolota clutched her chest, asking Altair in disbelief. I didn't even know such a shop existed. It's normal, this shop only caters to discreet regulars. After all, the goddess also respects women's rights. If some men misbehave and get handsy, the owner would have a lot of trouble and might be invited to the police station for tea. Altair paused, seemingly to pique Lolota's curiosity, and continued slowly. A friend living in Hillsden Borough told me about this place when I visited him earlier. You know, these major shareholders always have some connections. So, are you going? Yes, I'm definitely going. Lolota snapped out of her fantasy. What materials do you need? I'll take you to the police station to find them right now. She was about to walk out of the church when she suddenly seemed to remember something and ran back to her prayer room. I'm going to change into a chief inspector's uniform, wait for me a moment. Altair, you are someone who understands empathy. Britain sighed, gazing at Altair with fervent eyes. That's a basic quality of a detective. We need to think from the criminal's perspective to find clues to their actions. Altair slightly raised his collar, as if to shield himself from the fervent gaze. Then, if one day I commit a crime, will you think from my perspective? Will you realize my fervent emotions? Britain stared directly into Altair's eyes. Calm down, you're a nighthawk. Don't say such dangerous things. Altair's mouth twitched, making his jaw stiff. Putting aside that if you commit a crime, You'd definitely be dealt with internally instead of having a bounty issued to us bounty hunters. Even if a bounty was issued, it might not even reach me, right? Are you asking me, a Sequence 8, to capture a Sequence 6 soul assurer? Are you trying to kill me? Thousands of thoughts flashed through Altair's mind, but in the end, he remained silent. This Briton fellow was even crazier than Lolota. If he ever truly crossed some strange line, Altair's situation might be dangerous in every sense of the word, and every kind of line. Altair sighed, only able to silently pray for Ms. Lolota to come out quickly. He dared not speak to Britain again, fearing that the other party would misunderstand, find some strange new topic, and then he wouldn't be able to control the situation. Fortunately, Lolota, driven by the motivation of maids, came out quickly, and Britain didn't get to be alone with Altair for long. When Altair left the quiet sanctuary, he let out a huge sigh of relief. The rest of the journey was relatively pleasant. Although Altair wasn't particularly fond of maids, at least Lolota wouldn't force him to wear a maid outfit. While sitting in the carriage, Altair's mind was still on these things. If I advance to Sequence 7 Demoness, will Britain stop bothering me? Altair seriously considered this possibility. But what if Ms. Lolota still pestered me to wear a maid outfit then? Thinking of this, Altair felt his spirituality fluctuate slightly. What's wrong? Your emotional color seems a bit off. Lolota, sitting opposite him in the carriage, asked with concern, did Britain bother you again? It's nothing major. Altair shook his head. Do you always keep your spirit vision on? Doesn't that consume too much? It's fine. I've advanced to spirit medium, so I have ways to observe emotional colors without opening spirit vision. Lolota smiled kindly, but then her expression turned rapturous. When I see the emotions of those shy maids gradually turn pink, I feel like my heart is melting. Is it too late for me to jump out of the carriage now? Altair reached up and gently rubbed his somewhat stiff jawline. The muscles there were not very flexible due to unconscious twitching. Regardless of whether he advanced or not, he should stay away from these two in the future. Altair secretly made up his mind. In the fog sea, inside the captain's cabin of the Blue Avenger. Alger Wilson held a round-bellied steel pen, writing in his logbook. October 27th, clear weather, haha, that's just a customary phrase. In fact, this sea is still covered in mist. Our basis for judging time is only the ship's clock. However, it has stopped several times, so the actual time might not be so accurate. Only on days like today, when the fog is slightly thinner, can we use the sun to make a preliminary judgment of the time. He flicked the steel pen and continued to write. We are still sailing along the sea line. However, no matter how close we get to that sea line, the distance between us and it remains unchanged. In our eyes, it remains in that position, as it has been ever since it abruptly appeared in our view. In this sea without reference points, we cannot observe it specifically. These are all conclusions reached previously. Alger pondered for a moment, then continued to write. We have also treated it as a barrier or other living beings, as tangible matter, and attacked it. However, the cannonballs fired and the Beander abilities used would all disappear as if striking empty space, not even raising a splash. Alger had never seen anything like this phenomenon in all his years of sailing, which made him feel quite tricky. Since the last Tarot Club meeting, he had been trying to find a way to break through that line. But he had failed again and again. However, Alger was not that worried. After all, it was a task given by Mr. Fool. If it had no difficulty, it wouldn't be worthy of the identity and status of the sea god. Moreover, he had recently made regular contact with Ms. Magician and obtained some supplies through her teleportation. As a Beander of the storm pathway, desalinating seawater was not a problem for him. In terms of food, with the magician's supplies and those mushrooms, Alger was not afraid of consumption. If there's still no result next week, I'll ask Ms. Hermit at the Tarot Club to seek help from Queen Mystic, hoping she might have some relevant information. After all, she's been at sea longer than I imagined. Alger thought relaxedly, picked up a glass of pale ale, took a sip, and then almost spat it out. Why is it so bad? With a bitter, fishy taste. Alger looked at the beer in the glass. White foam floated above the golden liquid, looking beautiful and seemingly normal. Alger suspiciously poured the white foam into the trash can, wanting to see what was wrong with the liquid. The clump of white foam also slid normally into the trash can, clinging to the waste paper Alger had thrown in. Wait, clinging to the paper. Alger suddenly realized something was wrong and quickly looked down. This look was enough to scare him into suddenly throwing out a miniature lightning bolt, which directly struck into the trash can. The white substance clinging to the waste paper was not beer foam, but a mass of wildly growing, constantly secreting yellowish-white liquid, filamentous mycelium. The liquid in the glass, separated from that white mycelium, instantly turned a leathery brown, as if something had died. Chapter 28, Sea King. A chilling sensation ran through Alger, making his skull tingle. I've drifted on the sea for so many years and seen all sorts of strange sights, but none have impacted me psychologically as much as this. It's just some mycelia, and the person who developed this is only a Sequence 5 druid, while I am now equivalent to a Sequence 3 Sea King. Alger took 2 deep breaths, suppressing his rapid heartbeat. The chilling sensation gradually faded, and Alger felt a slight sense of relief. However, the tingling itch from his mouth never disappeared. No, this isn't just a feeling. Alger quickly ran to the mirror, intending to open his mouth to check its condition, but he was startled to find that his mouth seemed to be sewn shut by something, making it impossible to open. In shock and anger, Alger forcefully opened his mouth, hearing countless tiny cracking sounds transmitted through his bones, as if threads were being torn, and due to their sheer number, it sounded like fabric ripping. The moment he opened his mouth, Alger caught a glimpse of what was inside. A dense mass of white mycelia had firmly sewn Alger's mouth shut, with pale rhizoids deeply embedded in the oral cavity walls, like clusters of alluring sea anemones. When Alger opened his mouth, the mycelia were forcibly pulled from his gums, and his mouth instantly became bloody. However, due to the secretions from the mycelia, Alger felt no pain at all, only a strong tingling itch spreading from his mouth throughout his body. And when those mycelia saw the blood, they paused for a moment, then began to grow wildly at more than 10 times the previous speed. In this critical moment, Alger remained calm. The instant he saw the mycelia in his mouth, he activated his spirituality, creating a corrosive, high salinity seawater in his mouth. After swirling it twice, he forcefully spat out the seawater along with the broken mycelia. The white mycelia instantly lost their vitality, carried by the seawater and splattering against the wall. Seeing some effect, Alger's mind eased slightly, but before he could settle down, the tingling itch returned, more intense and harder to suppress than before, almost causing him to lose control. Alger quickly continued to open his mouth to check, discovering in surprise that although the upper part of the white roots had been corroded, their aerial roots had not completely died. Instead, they were drilling into the cracks inside his mouth. Alger felt as if a mad dentist was operating wildly in his mouth, unsettling him and causing his spirituality to fluctuate. If that's the case, then even if I generate a plasma ball in my mouth, the effect will likely be very poor. So, before those fine threads grow out, I must quickly use that move. Alger's thoughts raced. He quickly settled his chi in his dantian, cleared his throat, gathered his spirituality, and began to sing loudly. This was an ability he possessed when he was still a Sequence 5 ocean songster. He could use his singing to interfere with enemies' spiritual bodies, making them dazed and disoriented, or rely on chaotic singing to make enemies irritable and lose their sanity. Even the deaf could hear it, as it belonged to spiritual communication and could not be isolated by physical means. A hoarse song emanated from Alger's mouth, like a circular saw cutting iron or fingernails scraping a blackboard, causing the wine glasses on the table to shatter and the wine to spill. When the sea in chaotic gloom plays with rocks, surging and roaring. When lightning with its purple-red light constantly reflects his image, and the sea wind, with impact and swirling, lifts his noble robes. Note, adapted from Pushkin, The Storm. As Alger's song resounded, the agitated threads in his mouth finally became completely still. Alger swept his tongue, and large clumps of gray aerial roots detached from his upper palate and around his frenulum. Alger quickly generated seawater in his mouth again, thoroughly rinsing it before confirming it was safe. The mushrooms were normal before, so why have they become like this now? Before Alger could ponder this, another, more urgent thought flashed through his mind. He had made such a commotion just now, yet not a single sailor had come to check. Although a ghost ship didn't require many sailors to operate, to maintain a certain level of combat effectiveness, there were still nearly 100 sailors on board, all of them beyonders. Even if they truly hadn't heard the song, the surging spirituality of a demigod that he had emitted earlier would have been enough for low-sequence beyonders to detect an anomaly. Thinking of this, Alger rushed to the door, wanting to twist the doorknob, but found that the door seemed to have taken root. Even with the strength of a demigod, he couldn't pull it open. Alger thought for a moment, then decisively twisted his body, azure phantom scales appearing on his skin. He slammed a fist onto the ancient wooden door panel, sending splinters flying and shattering the entire door into countless tiny fragments. However, the fragments did not fall to the ground but were enveloped by layers of spiderweb-like mycelia. Outside the captain's cabin, at some unknown point, it had been completely surrounded by mycelia, like a giant cocoon, seemingly incubating some terrifying creature within. That druid's mushrooms only absorb the life force of living beings. However, this Blue Avenger, in a sense, is also a living being, and ghosts were also living beings in the mystical sense. In his urgency, Alger no longer hesitated. He fully unleashed his spirituality, activating the ocean songster's ability once more, causing a song that made spirituality tremble to echo again across the boundless sea. But this time, Alger infused more spirituality and enhanced his control, precisely confining the power of the song within the range of the Blue Avenger. In the ocean's solitude, far from human vanity, and the pride that built her, she sleeps. Rooms of steel, like a burnt-out pyre. Cold tides like a harp strumming through them, adapted from Hardy's, The Convergence of the Twain. The ghost-like song instantly spread to every corner of the ghost ship. At the edges of the vessel, it seemed to collide with an invisible wall, shattering like waves crashing against rocks, turning into tiny ripples that joined the new sound wave, adding a thunderous drumbeat to the song. Under the full suppression of the Sequence 4 cataclysmic Interer Alger, the white mycelia covering the entire ship recoiled, beginning to recede like a tide. Alger followed closely, conjuring a violent tornado around himself, blowing away all the mycelia attempting to touch him and any residual mycelia, then compressing them into a large ball under air pressure. Alger cautiously maintained his Beander abilities, gradually moving towards the deck. Along the way, he saw one sailor after another who had lost consciousness from the song. On their bodies were residual, gradually dying white mycelia. These mycelia savagely drilled out from their skin, ears, and even inside their skulls and eye sockets, leaving behind gruesome bloody gashes from which yellow pus-like liquid flowed. Alger conducted a preliminary check. At least most of the sailors had not yet perished, so his decision had been relatively timely. As long as he resolved the situation here, then promptly contacted Miss Magician to have her use the Traveler's Door to teleport the entire ship back to headquarters, where ancient knowledge from the City of Silver, led by Sun, could be used to suppress similar mutations. Before that, I need to find the source of the problem. Alger frowned, completely pulverizing a corpse that had fallen from the stairs with lightning, turning both the body and the mycelia and spores it carried into drifting ashes with a plasma ball. There haven't been any problems during so many days of sailing, but now this has happened. Does this mean some power has affected this sea area? As long as I find that source, I might not be far from completing Mr. Fool's mission. Having made this decision, Alger stepped forward, and a white bone short staff emitting a faint blue light silently slid out from within his wide, dark blue robe. Alger raised the short staff high, and at its tip, thunder and storms vaguely gathered. The moment the white bone short staff appeared, the turbulent sea surface instantly became calm. Then, surging waves suddenly rushed towards the ghost ship, lifting it to the crest of the waves, higher than the reefs, even higher than the deep mist. The seawater directly propelled the ship into the sky, like submissive slaves raising their master's carriage high. At this moment, Alger was equivalent to a Sequence 3, a true Sea King. Chapter 29, Tarot Club Assembles Part 1. Alger strode onto the deck, the gales around him sweeping everything into a spherical prison made purely of storms. Then, the hurricane blew this spherical prison away from the deck, away from the Blue Avenger. At the same time, crimson flames flowed straight down from Alger's feet, passing through the deck and into the sea, yet they did not extinguish. Instead, they transformed into red light that shot straight to the seabed. After a moment of silence, the seawater directly below the spherical prison suddenly began to boil, as if something intensely hot was surging upwards from the seabed. About 3 seconds later, scarlet lava broke through thousands of meters of seawater, erupting as a scorching torrent that rose from the depths, like a giant fiery tree growing from the seabed. Its spreading scarlet branches extended for hundreds of meters, completely destroying the fungal mycelium, leaving no trace. This was an ability possessed by a Sequence 4 cataclysmic enterer, to stimulate underground lava to break through the Earth's crust and erupt. Under the enhancement of the Sea King's scepter, this ability could even cause the flames of an underwater volcano to spray above sea level. Alger held the Sea King's scepter, his expression solemn. The Blue Avenger was lifted into the air and propelled rapidly towards the horizon by the hurricane. Normally, doing this would consume a lot of spirituality. Although Alger possessed the status and some abilities of a Sea King, he couldn't, like a true Sea King, freely draw spirituality from the ocean to replenish himself. Now, affected to this extent, it was a good time to use this ability and accelerate his journey. If the crew members' symptoms improved, it would indicate that the previous location was the point where the pollution leaked out. Alger's mind raced. The lava had already solidified, forming a giant, towering tree emitting white steam. This was not only to clear the pollution but also to leave a landmark. Subsequently, on the empty deck, Alger, holding the Sea King's scepter, chanted the honorific name of the Fool, briefly describing his predicament and casting it into the crimson stars of all Tarot Club members. As a former ghost captain who had lurked between the Storm Church and pirates, Alger knew very well that even if his strength was already powerful enough, he still had to prepare as much as possible when facing unknown dangers. And coincidentally, the Tarot Club already had a sufficiently mature foundation in this regard. Mr. Fool must have foreseen this kind of thing, foreseeing that we would have to shoulder the heavy responsibility after his slumber, which is why he supported us so much, allowing all of us Beyonders, who were originally only Sequence 5 at most, to advance to demigods. Mr. Fool is indeed far-sighted. In Backland, within a 2-story house on Golden Palm Street, Furs was currently lying on a soft chair, a crimson, round-bellied fountain pen in her mouth, brainstorming the plot for her next novel. Then, the crimson star before her eyes began to expand and contract, bringing the prayer of Alger, the hanged man, to her ears. Furs opened her mouth in astonishment, and the fountain pen fell due to gravity, its nib piercing her white shirt, yet leaving no stain. The pen bounced off her soft chest and landed perfectly into an inverted pen cap on the table, a small trick of a trickmaster. However, Furs was not paying attention to this at the moment. Mr. Hanged Man is in trouble. Furs was somewhat surprised. In the communication, the Hanged Man explicitly stated that he needed the help of 4 Tarot Club members, including her. This is rare, Mr. Hanged Man asking us for help. Furs shook her head, yet her movements were not slow. A phantom door of spirituality instantly opened, swallowing Furs's figure within. Then the door closed, and the petals in the vase silently fell to the ground. On the other side, in the city of Silver Settlement in Byam, Derek, the son, was currently standing on a rare, undeveloped plot of land. There, a battered silver armor lay, leaning against a tombstone, like a sleeping warrior. On the other side of the tombstone, the following words were carved. Call an Iliad, the last chief of the forsaken land of the gods. Light is the meaning of everything. Light was once what the residents of the city of Silver pursued. For this, they prayed in darkness for 2,584 years. However, now that they had arrived in the world of light promised by Mr. Fool, where should they go? Whenever Derek felt lost, he would come to the chief's tomb and stand in solemn silence for a long time. However, today's solemn vigil was interrupted. The prayer of Mr. Hanged Man reached his ears through the illusory crimson star. Subsequently, a door of spirituality burst open, and Furs, still in her loungewear, jumped out. Your excellent initiative is truly enviable. Derek praised sincerely. Is it? Furs scratched her hair awkwardly. Then let's go and return quickly. We still need to find Miss Justice and Madam Hermit. After speaking, she reached out and embraced Derek's wrist, because Derek was over 2 meters tall, and his forearm alone was thicker than Furs's thigh. Furs had originally intended to grab Derek's wrist with one hand, but she doubted if her hand could grasp Mr. Sun's large-knuckled wrist. Wait a moment, I'll inform Leovel and the others not to worry about me. Derek smiled shyly, and from somewhere, he pulled out a giant silver broadsword, pointing it gently towards the sky. A golden light shot straight from the longsword into the sky, transforming into a brilliant rain of light that showered down on the residences of the City of Silver residents. Courage and hope instantly ignited in the hearts of all City of Silver residents touched by the light rain, and a voice echoed in their ears, telling them that he would be going to sea for a period of time. Then, let's go. Derek deftly spun the greatsword with one hand, putting it back on his back. The strong wind generated by the sword's movement gently ruffled Furs's bangs. Oh, okay. Furs, who suspected a section of her bangs had been cut off, was still in a daze. Hearing Derek's call, she finally reacted. On the Sonia Sea, Frank Lee, the poison expert, was cultivating plants in his room, occasionally grabbing a handful of soil from a pot, chewing it in his mouth, and when he spit it out, the clump of soil had transformed into a strange colloid substance, slowly moving towards the roots of the wheat, completely enveloping the root system of the wheat seedlings, forming an umbrella-shaped, resilient structure. The originally stiff leaves above ground, however, strangely withered and turned white, finally forming small, dense aerial roots with sharp tips. Frank Lee swiftly threw a fresh, bloody piece of meat next to the aerial roots, then dragged a squealing piglet from a bamboo basket in the corner of the cabin. With a gentle pat on its head, the piglet quieted down. However, in the eyes of both the piglet and Frank, the horrifying scene of the anemone-like aerial roots madly plunging into the meat, turning it into a puddle of blood, was reflected. Frank nodded in satisfaction, kicking the piglet with the back of his foot. The piglet obediently lay on its back, exposing its underside and abdomen. Then, Frank extended his broad, calloused palm and grabbed the clump of aerial roots, remaining indifferent even as they madly pricked his palm. He suddenly exerted force, pulling out the fungal cap from beneath the soil, bringing it close to his eyes for careful observation, ignoring the wildly flailing false roots that tried to poke out his eyes. He then nodded in satisfaction, grabbed the fungal cap with his other hand, and slammed the end with the aerial roots onto the piglet's lower body. Subsequently, the piglet let out a tragic cry. The aerial roots instantly formed a sheath-like structure, with short, thin, pointed tips extending inwards, piercing into the piglet's body and beginning to secrete a strangely colored, repulsive liquid directly into the piglet's bloodstream. When the substance had completed a circulation and reached all parts of the piglet's body, the piglet's tragic cries ceased, replaced by a strained grunting sound of extreme endurance. When that endurance reached its limit, a large amount of red and white mixed viscous liquid gushed from the outer wall of the gray sheath-like structure, woven from mycelium, at the connection point with the base of the piglet's lower body. Then, the sheath-like object scattered with a splash, greedily absorbing the liquid dripping onto the piglet's belly. The piglet's lower body was now left with only a hollow, and its abdomen was strangely distended. The mushroom also entered a state of slumber, the color of its cap changing from translucent white to a red and white mixture, with tiny bubbles vaguely bursting within the fungal cap. The number of successful hybridization experiments has been increasing recently. Frank wiped his hands, tossed the sleeping mushroom back onto the culture medium, and carefully moved the piglet into an empty cage by the wall. After this experiment succeeds, will it be a mushroom that tastes like a pork pie, or a piglet that grows wheat ears on its body? Chapter 30. The Tarot Club Assembles Part 2. Just as Frank was reveling in his improved mastery of hybridization techniques, the door to his room was roughly kicked open. A fiery woman, dressed in a black, skin-tight outfit made of a material resembling fish skin, burst into the room. She stepped carelessly into the filth on the floor, a mixture of unknown viscous liquid, minced meat, and dead filamentous plant veins, completely ignoring the strange creatures piled by the wall. She grabbed Frank Lee by the collar and dragged him out of the cabin. Nina. Frank looked bewildered at Nina, the sexy wind blessed of Sequence 6 on the ship. Of course, even though her dressing style was quite daring, revealing exactly what should be revealed, and her figure was quite beautiful, Frank's gaze held no such thoughts. In his eyes, there were only two kinds of things in the world, those that could be planted in the soil and those that could not. Shut up and don't talk too much, the captain wants you to come over. Her well-defined face showed some impatience. Ever since she had recently advanced to Sequence 6, her temper had become increasingly volatile. Of course, it was also possible that it was because she was pregnant with the child of the first mate, Ottolov. In Frank's opinion, Ottolov was old enough to be Nina's father, but this was not a problem Frank often considered. Your mushrooms seem to have gone awry. Two demigods have come and asked the captain to help them solve the problem. Nina waved her hand irritably, as if shooing away invisible flies. Arriving at the captain's cabin door, Nina knocked loudly, and a clear female voice came from within. Tell him to come in alone. Nina raised her leg and kicked Frank's wide, millstone-like rear, making him stagger 2 steps into the captain's cabin. Then, she closed the door, creating a space for the captain and Frank to converse. In front of Frank, besides son Derek and magician Furs, there was also a black-haired woman sitting in an armchair in the center of the captain's cabin. She wore a black robe with silver speckles like a starry sky and an old brass balance scale pendant on her chest. Her eyes looked at Frank with a complex expression, as if contemplating how to begin. Star Queen Katlia considered her words for a while, but ultimately gave up and said to the half-giant behind her, Mr. Borg, first verify if he has been affected by anything strange. All right. Derek didn't say much. He simply extended his right hand, letting a clear, warm golden light fall upon Frank Lee. This was the ability of an unshadowed. Highly sensitive to evil presences, they could detect whether a target was truly possessed by an evil entity through various similar methods. Derek believed that under his scrutiny, even a secret of the level of Amon's clone would be detected if it made the slightest mistake. The pure light shone on Frank Lee, yet there was no scene of black mist evaporating, as Derek had imagined, nor even a scream. Frank Lee merely smiled guilelessly, scratched his hair, and pulled off a bizarre, hybridized piglet wheat mushroom tri-fusion object stuck to his hand. He shook it vigorously, letting the mushroom-like object softly and quietly droop. Is something wrong, Captain? Frank smiled guilelessly, like a child weighing over 200 pounds. The 3 Tarot Club members exchanged glances, momentarily at a loss for words. Hillsden Borough, Salma Café. Altair was sitting in the cafe's outer hall, quietly drinking coffee. The rare warm winter midday sun of Backland shone on him, gradually warming his body, which had become somewhat stiff from trekking in the cold wind all morning, and his blood flow began to ease. Altair stirred his coffee, which had just received a large spoonful of sugar, with a teaspoon while flipping through photocopied case files he had just obtained from the police station, which emitted the smell of cheap ink. These were files Ms. Loretta had helped him get, detailing serious criminal cases such as rape and murder that had been reported or discovered in the East Borough in recent months. If he were to investigate these files as a private detective, he would most likely be directly turned away. However, every Nighthawk was at least a senior inspector, even without relying on their Nighthawk identity, simply by their position within the police system. Obtaining these materials was a matter of a single word. Next, Altair, as promised, took Ms. Loretta to the agreed-upon Salma Cafe and paid her first annual fee of £10. She should now be enjoying knee pillow service in a private room inside. Hopefully, she wouldn't end up on the cafe's blacklist. Thinking of this, Altair couldn't help but reach out and tap his chest 4 times. Altair took a sip of coffee, braced himself, and began to carefully examine the case files. Over the past 2 months, there have been a total of 63 reported or confirmed rape cases in the East Borough. The number of unreported cases might be even higher. As he read, Altair's brow gradually furrowed. According to this calculation, there was at least one such case in the East Borough every day on average, and the case closure rate was terrifyingly low, not even 20%. And the highest punishment the criminal received was merely a whipping and a £2 fine. Altair looked at these files and momentarily lost his mood for coffee. His unapproachable aura, when he was reading intently, made the maid who was supposed to serve him tremble and stand far away, not daring to approach. Altair picked up a pencil and began to mark the location of each case on a map of the East Borough. Then, he drew one non-overlapping circle after another through these locations, circling all the crime scenes that were approximately on the same circumference. If the culprit still retained his sanity, then he would not choose a location close to his hiding place. Altair used a blue pencil to connect the points on the outer circle, marking the intersection points, and then drew circles with the intersection points as centers, trying to encompass more crime scenes within the circles. Then, the possible crime scenes for the culprit were reduced to just these few. Altair took out a red pencil and circled 3 centers that involved the most crime scenes. The culprit's daily radius of activity was his walking distance. To eliminate the negative effects of the mystical item, he was unlikely to take a public carriage to find a target, as that would expose more problems. Of course, if the culprit had lost some of his sanity, then he would not consider these issues and would only look for targets nearby to satisfy his urges. In that case, his approximate locations would be these few. Altair switched to a red pencil, repeated the above procedure, and then circled several blue circles. If the culprit was in the red circle, it meant he still had his sanity and anti-reconnaissance capabilities, and was relatively dangerous. And if the culprit was in the blue circle, as long as the tracker didn't investigate excessively and make the culprit feel threatened, there generally wouldn't be a problem. Altair thought for a moment and decided to wait until Ian's investigation yielded results before combining this speculative map with the culprit's hotel location map. This would further narrow down the scope. He decided to investigate the situation within the red circles himself and assign the relatively less dangerous investigation tasks to the bounty hunters. This was not entirely due to any gentlemanly spirit, but because Altair was worried that those bounty hunters would alert the artisan, causing him to act prematurely or flee Backland, which would completely ruin his mission. Backland. Altair sighed and put away the case files. He had completely lost interest and was preparing to greet Lolota and leave the cafe. "Didn't you think of these things before?" A pleasant female voice came from behind Altair, yet in Altair's memory, there should have only been a white wall behind him. Altair sprang up as if electrocuted, instinctively throwing a punch with one hand while using the other to support his body, executing a backflip onto a sofa on the other side, facing the direction of the voice. "Don't be nervous. It's me." The other party's voice was a little helpless. Altair looked closely and saw that the newcomer was indeed Ms. Audrey, wearing a dark blue cloak. The surrounding maids, however, seemed oblivious to all of this, as if Altair had merely yawned. "I apologize. This is an assassin's instinctive reaction when someone approaches from behind." Altair awkwardly withdrew his hand from Ms. Audrey's gently raised wrist. "It's all right. Let's return to our previous topic. Your investigation progress is even faster than I imagined. I didn't expect you to also be an excellent detective. I've only seen detectives like you in the Moriarty case files." Audrey nodded slightly in praise. "This is just some basic logical thinking ability," Altair said modestly. "You don't need to be modest." Audrey smiled, then said seriously, "I'm preparing to leave for a period of time. I can still hear your prayers, but it will be difficult to give you timely support." P.S. Exam on Saturday, no update for 1 day. Future update times will revert to 8 p.m., and for double updates, 1 chapter at 12 p.m. and 1 chapter at 8 p.m. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Chapter 31, The Tarot Club Gathers Part 2. Alright, so, if I find that Artisan wants to leave Backland during this time, should I continue to follow him? Altair didn't press for where the other party wanted to go or how long it would take her to return. It's best not to ask about the employer's affairs if possible. Although Ms. Audrey seemed quite reasonable, she was, after all, a Beander of demigod level. The more one knew about such high-level matters, the easier it was to invite misfortune. If he leaves, find out when, where, and how he leaves, as well as where he is going. Audrey nodded slightly. Someone will be here to pick me up soon. Before that, we have 5 minutes. You can ask any questions you're interested in, such as about our organization, or any mystical knowledge you don't understand. Regarding these, I trust your judgment. Altair said humbly. Also, the contact person from the demonist sect approached me yesterday, and I have agreed to become a member of their peripheral organization, Theosophy Order. The bar owner. Audrey chuckled softly. I know. I was observing you remotely the whole time. If she had intended to harm you, I could have directly influenced her from a distance. Altair's heart skipped a beat. This meant that his every move in Backland had been under Ms. Audrey's surveillance. So, the matter entrusted by Sister Vesper. Regarding the matter with that sister, I do not intend to interfere excessively. Audrey perceived Altair's thoughts and spoke directly as he hesitated. However, this doesn't mean I am completely unconcerned about it. The official organizations are the same, even though she is simultaneously a favored one of the god of combat and a quasi-favored one of the Earth Mother. It's difficult for the official organizations to handle, but necessary surveillance is still indispensable. But you don't need to worry. I've already dealt with the cognition of relevant personnel. Otherwise, Ms. Veneta would have been directly apprehended by the Nighthawks when she returned home yesterday. Audrey beckoned, and the maid standing by her side came over, bringing her a cup of coffee. She lifted a corner of her veil and took a small sip, playfully sticking out her tongue. As expected, I still can't get used to this coffee that costs £2 per caddy. It's really too bitter. She released her hand, letting the cup float in the air, and took the sugar cube jar Altair handed her, adding 2 white sugar cubes. However, what I want to tell you is that although Ms. Veneta's storytelling ability is average, what Sister Vesper said is basically true. At least, she herself believes it to be true. I went into her dream to confirm it once. I have to say, she is truly a devout sister, far more devout than most of us. Her attitude towards the god of combat is not just reverence for a deity, but also includes attachment to a father, respect for a teacher, and so on. It can be said that the god of combat in her heart embodies all the positive emotions a human can possess. Audrey's words carried a hint of regret. It's just a pity that the god of combat has already fallen. The moment he heard this, Altair's mind was greatly shaken, making him almost want to kneel and pray. Fortunately, Audrey immediately adjusted his mental state, which allowed him to barely maintain his composure. But, that's a god. Altair said tremblingly, who can kill a god? Of course, another god, or several others. Audrey said profoundly, however, it's difficult for us to truly confirm this. After all, what means a god possesses, and what truly counts as defeating a god, are not things we should or can understand. Therefore, I hope you can confirm this point through this experience. This is too crazy. Altair shook his head like a rattle drum. Breaking into the god kingdom of a true god. Can that one mystical item withstand the suppression of the god kingdom? It certainly can. Unexpectedly, Audrey affirmed this directly. I tried to divine the origin of that item yesterday. Although I caught a glimpse of a few fragments, I also paid a considerable price. After speaking, she reached up and removed her veil, revealing the lower half of her fair face. Upon seeing that half-face, Altair's pupils instantly constricted. The other party's facial features were soft, her skin fair. If complete, it would indeed be a pleasure to behold. The premise being, if complete. The skin, flesh, and bones of Ms. Audrey's upper half of her face had all disappeared, leaving only a phantom concept, forming a translucent, light blue humanoid. Only her emerald-like eyes remained intact, gazing at Altair, preventing him from losing control on the spot. Although the formed humanoid was also very beautiful, sparkling with brilliant light like stars, this glance still caused Altair's spirituality to instantly boil, and tiny tentacles, like goosebumps, uncontrollably grew on his skin. Fortunately, Ms. Audrey quickly pulled her veil back up. Then, a gentle voice sounded in Altair's mind, calming his restless astral body, etheric body, and mental body, and the physical anomaly also disappeared. The veil seemed to have a sealing effect, preventing her incomplete mythical state from affecting reality. I originally intended to use that item to confirm his situation myself. For this, I made what I believed to be the most thorough preparations. Even against a true grade 0 sealed artifact, that is, an item of the angel level, I wouldn't suffer even a bit of harm. Audrey said with a hint of self-mockery, but I quickly paid the price for my short-sightedness. That Twilight emblem is not an angel-level relic, but a genuine part of the god of combat. So, I temporarily lost a part of my body. But don't worry, for an existence of my level, as long as it doesn't attract his direct malice, this extent of damage will recover within a week. Therefore, with this sealed artifact, you are sufficiently protected against most threats within the Twilight Emblem God Kingdom. I also divined this and confirmed there are no issues. Additionally, I have dealt with this necklace, you should return it to Ms. Veneta. Its side effects have been completely removed by me, and it will not leave any permanent impact, though it will confuse the user's sense of time after prolonged use. Audrey slowly rose and handed over the ruby-encrusted necklace. I hope you can complete the exploration before next Monday's gathering. I should be leaving soon. Please wait a moment. Altair suddenly remembered something. What if we go to explore tomorrow and don't find any information useful to Sister Vesper? Audrey stopped, pondered for a moment, and slowly said, "If that's the case, you can tell her you are a believer of the Evernight Goddess." I am a believer of the Evernight Goddess. What does that mean? Altair was a bit confused for a moment. Was she telling him to make her think he was an official Beander and use that to threaten her? Altair couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. However, Ms. Audrey had already vanished into thin air. Wait, was the only question Sister Vesper wanted to know truly just the state of the god of combat? Altair suddenly remembered a previous statement from Sister Vesper. A betrayer like me is not worthy to enter his god kingdom. When holding the Twilight emblem, I can feel its repulsion towards me. Could it be that Sister Vesper couldn't enter the world connected by the Twilight emblem, not because the god of combat blamed her for abandoning her faith, but because she wasn't a believer of the goddess? But why would the god of combat's god kingdom not allow a favored one of the god of combat to enter, yet welcome a believer of the goddess like me? Altair suddenly clapped a hand over his mouth, his movement so large it almost knocked over the teacup. The maid beside him immediately came forward to ask if there was a problem, causing a momentary commotion. Waving the maid away, Altair forcibly suppressed his heart, which was pounding uncontrollably from shock. Could Ms. Audrey mean that the Evernight Goddess killed the god of combat? But Veneta is clearly a believer of the Earth Mother. Right, when I asked who could kill a god, Ms. Audrey replied, perhaps, more than one god. And her sending me in this time is to obtain further information. After all, we don't understand the means of killing a god, so it's hard to confirm whether the other party was completely killed. Just like a reader who doesn't know where the author lives can't confirm whether the other party is diligently writing a book at home. Altair slumped onto the chair, feeling as if he had absorbed too much shocking information in a short period. After a while, Ms. Loretta walked out of the private room, looking refreshed, followed by a maid whose face was so red it looked like it could drip blood. Her clothes were a bit disheveled, and her breathing was much heavier. "What's wrong, Altair? Why are you so dispirited in such a nice place? Loretta greeted Altair. As she spoke, the maid behind her let out a short, muffled shriek like a cat whose tail had been stepped on, then quickly scurried into the kitchen with tiny steps. If I told you that a Beyonder of demigod level just passed by and had a cup of coffee with me, and told me secrets about the god of combat, would you believe me? Altair sighed inwardly for the maid and responded casually. You're truly humorous. Loretta was stunned for a moment, then laughed with Altair. At the same time, Audrey, walking in an alley, paused. She tilted her head slightly, a faint smile on her lips, as if speaking to someone. This transaction is settled then. I'll help your Earth Mother Church confirm his news, and in return, you must help me confirm the news of him, whom I am looking for. Chapter 32, Preparation. After bidding farewell to Ms. Loretta, it was already past 3 in the afternoon. Altair thought for a moment and, instead of going straight home, hailed a taxi carriage and went to a small alley about 2 streets away from his house. Altair got out of the carriage and walked to the end of the alley. He pulled out a small key from his pocket and opened an old, dilapidated wooden door that hadn't been opened in a long time. This was one of Altair's secret hideouts. After all, keeping all suspicious items at home would be a rather unwise move for an assassin. Altair entered the room, carefully closing the door behind him. Then, he took out matches from his pocket and, using the faint light filtering through the dust-covered window, lit the oil lamp inside. The warm firelight illuminated the room, and although it was still very cold, there was at least a little psychological comfort now. The dim lamplight lit up the room, revealing a few simple pieces of furniture. A low 4-poster bed, a sofa with a large hole in its upholstery exposing its hollow interior, and several tin boxes in the center of the room. Altair opened one of the boxes and found holy night powder, 2 candles, 1 gold and 1 silver, a very old incense burner, and a silver plate. Then, he found an oak staff with an amethyst embedded in its end in a drawer. The staff was crudely made, but that didn't affect its function in ritual magic. Altair carefully adjusted his position and drew a simple symbolic ritual array on the ground with holy night powder. He planned to make a batch of darkness domain charms just in case. If the Evernight goddess truly gained authority over the god of combat's divine kingdom and could impose restrictions on those who entered, then preparing a batch of darkness domain charms might play a crucial role. Here, I must complain about the author's setting for ritual magic in the original work. Strictly speaking, the rituals described by the author are higher-level magic, praying for blessings from entities similar to what are called spiritual bodies, or magic tides in Golden Dawn magic, like the Evernight goddess. Their characteristics include frequent sanctification of ritual tools, black and white candles, holy water, incense, and so on. However, he later described his knowledge as coming from Wicca, a lower-level magic that achieves its goals by moving natural energy. For some reason, I will not fully describe the ritual magic section. Altair simply performed the sanctification ritual and the spirit-expelling ritual, constructing a closed spirituality space. Then he picked up the carving knife, imbued it with spirituality, and carefully carved patterns onto 2 pre-prepared silver foils. He first carved 2 symbolic representations of the Evernight goddess onto the base material, then inscribed several obscure Hermes language words. Unlike the slumber charm and soul-quieting charm, commonly used by the Nighthawks, Altair carved Hermes language words symbolizing guidance this time. He was preparing to create a positioning charm, which few people used. This charm, after being imbued with spirituality by the user, could locate what the user wanted to find within a certain range. As far as Altair knew, the Nighthawks had mystery prior, with high spiritual perception and another unknown profession also skilled in divination, so they rarely used such charms. After all, the Evernight goddess's charms were all made of silver, and each one cost money. However, this charm was still very useful for Altair, who only knew magic mirror divination. Although Veneda's sequence also had some ability to find things, it was uncertain how effective this ability would be in an unfamiliar environment. As for charms with active effects, like the slumber charm, Altair did not deliberately prepare them. Because if Sister Vesper's description was correct, they would be facing an enemy at least around sequence 5, and as a Beyander not specialized in making charms, the active charms he produced would have very limited effect, even if he just thought about it. Instead of trying to cope with danger, it was more convenient to reduce the time spent in the Twilight Country to lower the chance of encountering danger. Subsequently, spirituality gushed from the tip of Altair's carving knife, outlining the Evernight goddess's corresponding spiritual number, 7, on the silver foil, along with a series of other materials. As he made the final stroke, all the spirituality connected, and the room was instantly enveloped by the vast and terrifying power surging from the magic tide. Then the spirituality became silent, and the room returned to quietness. The candles also extinguished, and the darkness in the room deepened by several shades. Altair picked up the few pieces of silver foil, each about the size of a baby's palm, from the table and gently rubbed them with his fingertips, feeling a warm, slightly cool sensation. The crafting process went smoothly. Altair nodded slightly, picked up the ritual knife, removed the spirituality wall that sealed the room, released the residual spirituality that had descended due to his prayer back into the spirit world, then cleaned the altar, erased the traces of the ritual, and carefully tucked the charms into the inner pocket of his overcoat. However, when Altair put his hand into his pocket, he found a hard, pendant-like object inside. He remembered clearly that the only item on him that could have a similar feel, the heart of the indulgent rose, was in the outer pocket of his overcoat. Altair pulled out his hand in confusion and took out the item. It was a silver chain with a yellow teardrop-shaped crystal hanging from it. Altair recognized this item. It was a pendulum, an adornment often carried by Beyonders skilled in divination. Strange, I seem to remember buying something similar before, but then again, maybe not. And even if I did, why would I, who only uses magic mirror divination, carry such a thing? Altair examined it for a long time but couldn't make sense of it. Even with spirit vision, there was nothing unusual. Altair rubbed his eyes and turned off spirit vision. Imbuing it with spirituality also yielded no reaction. It seemed to be just an ordinary pendulum. Could it be that I accidentally found it when cleaning the room on Monday? It's possible. After all, I had a fight with Veneta that night, and my spirituality was severely depleted, so it's understandable to forget some minor details. Hey, I'm really a bit paranoid. I've encountered more high-sequence Beyonders these past few days than I have in my entire life, and I just learned some secrets of the true gods and the hidden truths of the War of the Gods. I've become a startled bird, and any little stir can scare me half to death. Altair comforted himself. No matter what this yellow crystal pendant is, even if it truly has a significant origin, could its level be higher than a true god? Thinking this, Altair quickly adjusted his mindset and tied the yellow crystal pendulum to the clasp on his cuff, wrapping it a few times around his wrist. Since he could pull it out of his pocket, there was no harm in occasionally using it. Altair found a long, oil paper-wrapped item in another box. He placed it on the ground and unwrapped it, revealing a double-barreled shotgun and various calibers of bullets sorted into several small cloth bags. He counted out 12 bullets and used his portable knife to cut a small piece of oil paper to wrap them, then put them into his coat pocket. Although assassination with cold weapons certainly fit the traditional image of an assassin, in the current general environment, various firearms were still mainstream. Although Altair had a legal gun permit, he only had a permit for his original self-defense revolver. The high-pressure steam rifles and revolving rifles stored in this warehouse were assembled from scrap parts bought on the black market. If found by the police, it would be enough for Altair to spend more than 10 years in prison. Meanwhile, Veneta was sitting by the fireplace, lost in thought. Today, her spirituality had basically stabilized, and she had more or less realized how provocative her words yesterday had been, making her a little uneasy. Due to Audrey's psychological suggestion, she actually couldn't take any actions that would pose a real threat to Altair, so if she truly angered Altair, she still wouldn't be able to handle it. He didn't come back at noon today, he wasn't driven away by me, was he? Veneda thought with a bit of guilt. If he really ran away, that would be a bit troublesome. This guy seemed to be good at housework, and his taste in home decor was also quite decent. In the East Borough, such people were an endangered species. Veneda narrowed her eyes, seemingly recalling the scene on Tuesday night when she escaped from the Zemong party's stronghold and entered his house. At that time, he was lying on the sofa, with a holy book of an unheard-of sect spread on the table, and a yellow crystal pendant folder in the book. Although it was a bit unbearable, she tentatively moved him back to the upstairs bedroom and just put the other things somewhere. It really is. Veneda wanted to say something to comfort herself but found she had nothing to say. Chapter 33, The Eve. After preparing for the next day's journey to the Twilight Country, Altair decided to walk home. It was already getting late, and soon the weather would turn cold. Altair turned up the collar of his overcoat and hurried through the streets. He walked very carefully, deliberately avoiding streets frequented by patrolmen. After all, the oil paper package he was carrying contained a high-pressure steam rifle, which was a controlled item, and being discovered would not be fun. So, he only slightly relaxed when he reached his doorstep. "Isn't that Mr. Altair?" A somewhat childish female voice sounded from behind Altair, startling him. He quickly turned around and found it was Sophie from next door. Seeing Altair's panicked expression, she giggled. "I'm sorry, I didn't expect you to react so strongly." Sophie wiped her eyes and apologized to Altair. "Honestly, if everyone who suddenly appeared behind me was as friendly as Sophie, my reaction wouldn't be so strong." Altair sighed inwardly and said to Sophie. "It's all right, did you just get back from the textile factory?" Since Mr. Stanson and Sophie both believed in the Lord of Storms, and his doctrine opposed girls attending school, only allowing them to receive home education, Sophie had entered the textile factory of the Garment Makers Association early. The boss here was also once a tailor, which made the workers feel more affinity for him. Moreover, this boss was also actively promoting the resolution of livelihood issues such as atmospheric pollution control, earning him high praise from the workers. "Yes, the boss said 2 days ago that if our output this month could be higher than last month, he'd give us a raise." Sophie's somewhat tired face was brimming with a happy smile. Altair saw it and couldn't help but feel a little emotional. "You're still at a growing age. Even if you have to work, don't push yourself too hard." Altair reached out and ruffled Sophie's hair. She was only about 60% of his height, making it quite easy to ruffle. "It's all right," Sophie was about to say something when Altair interrupted her. "If you overwork yourself now, you won't grow tall, you know." It turned out that the threat of not growing tall was exceptionally effective on children. Sophie indeed fell silent after hearing it. "Has Mr. Stanson not returned yet? Would you like to come to my house for a bit?" Seeing that the room next door was not lit, Altair proactively invited her. "No, I have to go back and cook for Dad first." Sophie politely shook her head in rejection. "You know, believers of the storm always have women do the housework, and our family's situation is quite special." Altair opened his mouth, but in the end, he couldn't think of anything to say, so he closed it again. Most of Mr. Stanson's family had died in wartime bombings, leaving only him and his young daughter, Sophie, to depend on each other. Perhaps because of this, Sophie had an exceptionally strong will. Originally, Mr. Stanson hoped she would stay at home, but at her strong insistence, he finally agreed to let her work at the factory. Seeing Sophie about to enter the house, Altair's mind turned, and he called out loudly in Sophie's direction, "When you have time, you can come to my house and let Veneda give you a few lessons." Really? Despite the distance, Altair felt Sophie's eyes widen instantly. She excitedly ran over, her cheeks slightly flushed from the cold wind outside. Of course, she doesn't have anything to do at home anyway. Altair unhesitatingly sold out, "Veneda." These past 2 days, Veneda had mostly been lounging on the sofa, doing nothing, and was indifferent to doing any chores, so Altair simply found her something to do. She's a university graduate, so you can rest assured in that regard. How amazing. Sophie's eyes seemed to sparkle with the star, making Altair feel inexplicably dazzled. All right, hurry home and cook for your dad. I'll go home and tell Veneta today. Altair smiled and waved to Sophie, watching her jog back into her room. Why did you make decisions for me again? Veneta's somewhat displeased voice came from behind Altair. Altair turned to look. She seemed to have just finished showering, her hair wet, standing at the doorway, wearing cotton pajamas that Altair had bought but only worn a few times, which she had apparently dug out from somewhere. White steam emanated from her body, and Altair could even faintly smell the scent of Donningsman shampoo on her. You don't have anything to do at home every day, do you? Altair smiled and urged her to quickly come inside. Don't stand at the door right after showering. You have to go do things for others tomorrow. Are you only happy if you get sick? You talk too much. Veneta rolled her eyes at Altair, disdainfully moving aside from the doorway to let Altair in, and placed the oil paper package on the floor. This is, Veneta crouched down and touched it with her hand. Your eating utensil. Sort of. I hope it still works. Altair kicked the package further inside with his foot, then hung his coat on the clothes rack. Oh, by the way, that pendulum you put in the book a couple of days ago, I put it in your coat pocket. Veneta suddenly seemed to remember something and told Altair. I put it in a book. Which book? Altair asked strangely. It was that so-called sacred text of the Fool Church. Veneta waved her hand. Aren't you a believer of the goddess? Why do you still keep such a sacred text of an evil god? When you get struck by lightning, remember to stay far away from me. I don't want to be implicated by you. TCH, live here if you want, or sleep on the street if you don't, Altair retorted subconsciously, then suddenly realized something was wrong and quickly asked Veneta. Where's that book? Where did you put it? There, I put it on your bookshelf. Veneta pointed with her hand. Altair followed her arm and saw the somewhat old sacred text, written in both Loan and Giant language, casually tucked into the bookshelf. Altair didn't care about anything else. He quickly walked over, picked up the sacred text, and hurried upstairs, leaving a remark for the somewhat bewildered Veneta. I suddenly remembered something. You heat up the leftover lunch and make do with that. Veneta's face seemed to lose its luster in an instant, and she lay back down on the sofa. Upstairs, Altair picked up the sacred text and examined it carefully. If it had been tucked into another book, it might have been a lapse in his memory, but he was very clear that he had absolutely never tucked a pendulum into this sacred text. My memory only goes as far as when I saw the description of angels in the sacred text. However, for some reason, I can't recall the last paragraph at all. Altair's expression gradually became solemn. Although he hadn't undergone systematic mystical education, such situations were not uncommon even in folklore. And the protagonists of these stories definitely did not have pleasant experiences afterward. Altair fretfully opened the sacred text and saw the revered name of the fool on the first page, saw the description of his authority, saw the footprints of his angels in the human world. Everything proved that this sect was by no means groundless, but a secret organization possessing at least one saint and one angel. Why do I always encounter such things? Altair exhaled, covering his face with his hand. After a while, he gritted his teeth and began to pray softly, praying to that mysterious existence. Altair was also very uneasy. After all, this was an unknown mystical existence, and praying to such an existence was a prohibition generally observed by Beyonders. However, Miss Audrey seemed to have already tied herself to that being's faction, and he had vaguely seen that mysterious gray fog once, seemingly unable to escape. Since that's the case, I might as well accept it. Occasionally praying to that being a few times. After all, Miss Audrey doesn't seem to have had any problems. Altair, with a devil-may-care attitude, recited the revered name of that being in ancient Hermes. The illusory whispers reappeared in his ears, and the familiar crimson light and grayish-white mist once again completely enveloped his spiritual body, depositing him before an ancient bronze-long table. Before Altair could look around, a soft chuckle reached his ears. Although the other party bore no ill will, this laughter made Altair feel a sense of dread. This was a suppression stemming from a higher life level. Altair quickly turned around, and what appeared before his eyes was a lady whose face was obscured by gray fog. Although her features were unclear, Altair could vaguely see her physique. She was about 1.5 meters tall, yet she exuded an invisible majesty. I wondered who was praying at this hour. It seems you are the newcomer, Justice mentioned. I must say, you've accepted this organization faster than I expected. Normally, these words should be asked by Mr. Fool, or by Miss Justice who recruited you, but times have changed. The lady clapped her hands, and 12 tarot cards materialized out of thin air, appearing before the astonished Altair. Our organization is called the Tarot Club. We gather here in this form every Monday afternoon. Of course, you can also participate, but only after you've chosen your codename. Currently, only these 12 codenames are available. By the way, you can call me Lady Judgment. This lady gives off a sense of majesty, a demigod of the arbiter pathway. Altair swallowed with difficulty, forcefully suppressing his fear, and focused his attention on the choices before him. I don't really care about these codenames, I'll leave it to fate. Altair casually flicked the 12 tarot cards in the air, making them spin rapidly around him. Finally, one tarot card slowly stopped in front of him. It was a beautiful woman wearing a crown, holding a golden scepter, exuding a feeling of holiness mixed with temptation. The tarot card, the Empress. Chapter 34. Signing testimonials. This chapter doesn't count as an extra update. As the title says, the mystery, Mr. Demoness and Miss Hunter, has officially signed a contract, and you can now cast your monthly votes. I always feel like not writing a chapter like this would be a disservice to the contract I worked so hard to get, so I'll just say a few simple words. From the beginning of September when this book was first serialized on Tieba, about 2 months have passed. Excluding the period in early September when I couldn't update consistently, the actual time I've been updating daily is only about a month. I'm not a full-time writer, I'm just an ordinary university student struggling to pass, so my feelings were very complicated when I first started serializing. On the one hand, I hoped more readers would come to read my book, even though it was still a solo period with no income at the time. On the other hand, I also hoped that the book would be completely ignored, giving me a reason to directly give up my hobby of writing novels. After all, it took up too much of my time. The beginning was really hard to get through. At its worst, there was only one recommendation ticket per day. Watching those people in the failed authors group say they'd cast a vote for themselves every day to encourage themselves, I could only smile awkwardly, because my own account didn't even have a single ticket, nothing to cast. Later, it gradually got a little better, and my own account also had one ticket. Every time I cast it myself, looking at the red dot on my phone, I would even try to tease myself. Although the reader group I created still only had me in it, I still posted some of my thoughts into the group, as if someone there was waiting for my update. Later still, the first reader joined the group. It was a reader from another fanfiction of mine that completely flopped because I stopped updating for a month due to health reasons. Even though we could have chatted directly, I deliberately chatted with him in the group, hundreds of messages, as if the group was particularly lively. Then, the first reader of this book, at Luawa, joined the group. At that time, editors from several websites like Changhua and Tato had approached me, asking me to sign with them, but because the original copyright of this book was with Yuan, it had to be cut. Moreover, those editors kept telling me that if it wasn't signed by 50,000 words, I could cut it. It's safe to say that if he had joined the group any later, I might have already cut this book. I originally wanted to say more, but after thinking about it, dragging on about these things feels a bit overly sentimental. It's better to just do a double update today. Manual funny face. In short, double updates will resume this week. From now on, if daily recommendation votes exceed 50 or monthly votes exceed 10, there will be double updates. If I have exams, I will inform everyone in advance. I don't have much spare capacity to save drafts, so every day's update is written on the spot. If there's too much, I can't write it all. The other chapter for today will be posted before 11. I'll go eat something good to celebrate and then come back to write the extra update chapter. Chapter 35, Mr. Empress bonus chapter. Empress, Altair's mouth twitched. Although he didn't really care much about these codenames, as it was an organization whose background he didn't even know, caring about them was indeed useless. However, this codename made him involuntarily recall his impending promotion. Assassin is truly harmful, Altair wanted to sigh, but in the end, he gave up. The other party seemed to have been observing him for a long time through Miss Audrey, also known as Justice, so the strength and information held by both sides were completely unequal, although from the seating arrangement, the members at this long table, except for Mr. Fool who was very likely seated at the head, seemed to have almost equal status. Altair did not believe in such a relationship. Who would believe giving equal status to a Sequence 8 in a group of guys above Sequence 4? Even if Miss Audrey didn't explicitly say it, Altair knew very well that even if he truly entered this mysterious space and was given an equally ranked codename, he would essentially still be running errands for the big shots. It was just that some things were inconvenient for them to do due to their high status, and they needed a convenient and easy-to-use pawn like him to handle them. Although he had now officially joined this organization, to prevent the leakage of relevant information, they, or perhaps they, would give him more attention and protection, which was better than his previous state where he could be completely abandoned if anything went wrong. However, he could still be abandoned by them. Pawns are meant to be placed on the chessboard. He couldn't forget that these ladies and gentlemen, despite their relatively casual attitudes, were big figures who could decide the life and death of a powerful baron with just a few words. Altair reminded himself once again in his heart. As an assassin, he might be bold enough in action, but in other situations, his approach to matters was extremely cautious and prudent. Altair glanced at the slowly disappearing tarot cards and quickly deduced that the remaining members were World, Moon, the Star, Sun, Magician, Hanged Man, and Hermit. A mysterious organization, Altair secretly evaluated in his heart. The Night Church once tried to investigate an organization that worshipped the Fool in the East Borough. He wasn't a Beander then. He never expected that today, he himself would become a member of this secret organization. Ahem. The lady opposite interrupted Altair's thoughts with a light cough. I heard from Miss Justice that you have already connected with the contact person of the demoness sect. Altair nodded quickly. Although he had made up his mind to maintain a certain distance from these guys, if the other party preferred the current mode of communication, he could only cooperate. Then that's perfect. Once you get news about the artisan that Miss Justice asked you to investigate, your next mission will be to investigate the demoness sect as much as possible, especially. At this point, Miss Judgment paused, the whereabouts of the primordial demoness. Another true god, Altair was already somewhat numb. What kind of secret organization have I joined? Why are they all scheming at the level of true gods? Don't be so nervous. At your current level, you won't be able to access information related to the primordial demoness yet. Miss Judgment noticed Altair's tension and couldn't help but chuckle softly. So, we will provide you with some help to quickly accumulate merit and grow to a level where you can understand these matters as soon as possible. Miss Judgment snapped her fingers. Before that, you need to advance your sequence as soon as possible. At least until you become a Sequence 7 demoness, you can officially join their sect. Well, now he had no choice but to advance. Altair could only give a bitter smile. He didn't know what other expression to use. If you investigate any results, you can directly recite the honorable name of Mr. Fool, recite what you want to convey in Hermes language or other languages with Beander effects, and then add the member you want to notify, and the other party will genuinely receive the message. In addition, items can also be transmitted through a sacrifice bestowal ritual, by praying to Mr. Fool and directly relaying them to the other party. Miss Judgment rested her chin on her hand, watching Altair through the gray fog. That's all I have to tell you for now. Also, you must not disclose any information about the Tarot Club to any other organization or person. I presume I don't need to remind you of that, do I? Now, if there's nothing else, please leave. The time here is the same as outside. don't let the lady you live with discover anything unusual. All right. Good night, Madam Judgment. Altair, relieved, quickly retracted his spirituality and returned directly to the real world. What a cautious fellow. Zio watched the spot where Altair's figure disappeared. Above his seat, the crimson star was no longer dim, and the mysterious symbol representing the Empress lit up on the back of the chair. This guy is smarter than I thought. He knows his strength doesn't match ours, so he decisively lowered himself, even though we didn't intend to force him to do anything based on strength or status. However, he didn't voluntarily join the demoness sect for investigation either. Zio couldn't help but cover her face. She realized that what she and Audrey were doing was, from a normal person's perspective, undeniably coercive. This guy is really clever. He made his goals align with ours from the start, so he wouldn't trigger the arrangements we set up assuming his disobedience, and he wouldn't suffer severe losses. Moreover, if he's too obedient and proactive, we'd feel guilty, which would subtly benefit him. If you can't resist, you adapt. He truly lives up to being an excellent assassin. Zio couldn't help but develop a strong interest in this newly joined member of the Tarot Club. She secretly resolved that when she returned from Intis, she would definitely find an opportunity to meet this newcomer. Although it was hard to see clearly through the gray fog, his physique and demeanor were indeed good. Zio recalled Altair's long legs, then glanced at her own small calf boots, about an inch off the ground, and suddenly felt a bit dejected. But then she seemed to remember something amusing and chuckled softly above the empty gray fog. Then good night, Empress, sir. Back in reality, Altair was silent for a moment, then decided to briefly jot down and organize recent events. Due to the sheer number of changes this week, he wanted to use a similar method to clear his thoughts. However, when he wanted to make a note, he found his fountain pen missing, which annoyed him somewhat. Just then, his attention shifted to the pendulum on his wrist. Since it's something tucked into that person's scripture, maybe it can be of some use. Altair hesitated, then put down the pendulum's chain, preparing to do a simple pendulum divination. This type of divination was a simplified ritual, not requiring a process of elimination with confirmation questions. He just needed to ask, "Where is the item I'm looking for?" 7 times in ancient Hermes, while mentally picturing the item. If the divination succeeded, the pendulum would swing back and forth in that direction. Altair's previous attempts had almost all failed. A Sequence 9 assassin's intuition was average, not the type particularly skilled in divination. Later, he simply gave up on similar attempts. Altair silently recited the phrase 7 times with a, "let's see," attitude, then opened his eyes. The citrine pendant remained still, unmoving. Tisk, failed again. Altair clicked his tongue, put away the pendulum, and prepared to get up and look around. But just then, he tripped over a potted plant on the floor. Fortunately, his body coordination was excellent, and he quickly maintained his balance. At the same time, a soft clink came from beneath him, and a black, round-bodied fountain pen fell out of his pocket. Altair froze instantly, casting his gaze towards the pendulum in his hand. The silver chain lay quietly in his palm, cradling the warm, smooth citrine pendant. After a moment of thought, Altair carefully placed the pendulum on the table, took out a sharp dagger from the drawer, and slowly pressed down on the silver chain with force. If it were an ordinary silver chain, it would probably have at least a knife mark. However, this pendulum chain was completely unharmed. Altair felt as if he was cutting a refined steel pillar that had been tempered 1,000 times. This thing seems to have a significant origin. Altair fell into contemplation. Chapter 36, First Time Seeking Death. Altair carefully examined the citrine pendulum. After a few minutes of initial inspection, his conclusion was only that it was a pendulum that he wasn't sure was enough to be a mystical item. Besides being sturdy, at most, it only added the skill of pendulum divination to him. But if this thing only has such a small peculiarity, Miss Audrey wouldn't need to secretly tuck it into a book, she could have just given it to me directly. Altair muttered to himself in confusion, could it be that she doesn't know either? Then where did this thing come from? After thinking for a while, he decided to perform the magic mirror divination ritual again. He wanted to try and divine the origin of this pendulum. Of course, this pendulum didn't look like an ordinary item, so Altair had to be fully prepared first. He first placed a basin of water in the room, then opened the window to let the light of the red moon shine into the room. Then, Altair found a thin thread and carefully hung the silver mirror used for divination, making sure it didn't touch the water surface. Altair found a silver dagger in the drawer and aimed it at the window, letting the crimson moonlight illuminate every side of the blade. Once the blade was filled with the spirituality attracted by this simplified prayer ritual, he lightly drew the blade across the taut thread. In his spiritual vision, the part of the thread touched by the blade was stained with a crimson spiritual glow. This way, once something bad was divined, the thread would break, and the ripples created when the magic mirror fell into the water would break the closed loop of occult significance formed between the water surface and the mirror surface, thereby interrupting the magic mirror divination ritual. If he had used this safeguard when divining the assassin's origin yesterday, Gegran wouldn't have been able to pinpoint his location through black magic. Altair sighed, but his hands didn't stop moving. He carefully placed the silver dagger into the clear water in the basin. His movements were very gentle. Until he had placed the entire dagger into the water, with only the hilt resting diagonally on the edge of the basin, the water in the basin didn't even ripple. Throughout this process, he consistently and carefully avoided letting his body appear in the reflection on the water's surface. After preparing, Altair reached into his pocket and pulled out a charm made of black bark and silver metal inlay. He took a deep breath, injected spirituality into the charm, and watched it slowly burn. Black flames climbed up the rough bark, and Altair carefully moved the charm so that the ashes produced by the burning fell precisely into the water basin. The ashes did not sink but clung to the silver dagger like lung snails, staining it an eerie gray black. As the charm was about to burn out, Altair quickly stopped the infusion of spirituality, leaving only the non-burning metal casing in his hand. This was a black magic charm, widely used among the natives of the southern continent. They used this charm to mutate blades, then, combined with the reflection of the water, guarded their homes. Once someone appeared in the mirror, the blade would pierce their shadow, thereby causing the same curse damage to the original body. Once any power seeps out of the mirror, it will directly face the damage of the curse. Altair nodded with satisfaction. Then he proceeded with the ritual as usual, setting up candles and incense, cleaning the altar, and devoutly performing the summoning ritual, and the spiritual channel slowly formed. You are the Evernight goddess, more exalted than the cosmos, more ancient than eternity. You are the Lord of Death, Mother of Concealment, Empress of Misfortune and Fear, Lord of Slumber and Silence. I implore your enlightenment, I implore you to bring the secrets of the night to this silver mirror. Please tell me the origin of this citrine pendulum. Altair finished his prayer and carefully glanced into the mirror, while constantly guarding his shadow to prevent it from appearing in the water beneath the mirror. The mirror's surface once again darkened, and then, like a movie playing, scene after scene began to appear in the mirror. Altair saw the black-haired youth hand a note to a kind old man in a black robe, drinking coffee, while receiving a sparkling citrine pendant from the other's hand. He saw the black-haired youth standing with difficulty amidst ruins as if swept by a storm, facing a pale figure in a thin black trench coat who slightly tilted his head and smiled as he said something to the youth. He saw a man with gold-rimmed glasses, dressed somewhat flamboyantly, curled up in the corner of an ancient hall, divining something with this citrine pendulum. However, the man then let out an exaggerated laugh, pulled out a revolver, and charged towards the altar surrounded by layers of eerie light. He saw the cold-faced adventurer controlling a violent gale, instantly defeating the deep darkness sweeping from the corner of the street, his revolver firing to completely shatter the enemy's head. A gentle smiling rich merchant, an elegant and mysterious magician, a scholarly academic, one figure after another appeared in the magic mirror, almost mesmerizing Altair. This seems to be the growth journey of a great existence. This pendulum has been worn by him for a long time, so it naturally possesses some Beander effects. Altair secretly guessed in his heart. He tried to put himself into the other's perspective and gained a new understanding of his power. Finally, the image in the mirror suddenly froze on a scene familiar to Altair. It was the deep, boundless gray fog from before, and a faceless gentleman sat at the bottom seat of the long table, facing the phantom of the fool at the head. The crimson stars behind him were exceptionally bright, like countless crimson moons. He is Mr. World. Altair was startled and wanted to end the divination, but he was surprised to find that his body suddenly became disobedient. His thoughts instantly became sluggish, and every joint felt as if a large amount of cement had been poured into them, making even wiggling his fingers a luxury. His body uncontrollably fell forward, as if an invisible force was lifting his ankles, trying to hang him upside down from the ceiling like a cured ham. Altair wanted to call for help, but found that he couldn't make a sound. All his thoughts were stolen by a mysterious force as soon as they arose, making it impossible to resist. In Altair's consciousness, a considerable amount of time passed. Suddenly, he heard a dull thud of a heavy object falling, followed by the cold, damp sensation from beneath him and a tearing pain in his chest. Altair struggled to get up. The magic mirror had fallen to the ground, the water basin was directly crushed by his body, and the silver dagger was plunged directly into his chest, half of the hilt embedded in his chest. Blood gushed out, and half the room's floor was covered in his blood and spilled clear water. Why didn't I die? Altair was a little confused. Then, he felt something and pulled out the necklace that Miss Audrey had asked him to give to Veneta from his pocket. Fortunately, I had the recovery ability provided by the heart of the indulgent rose. Otherwise, that dagger just now would have killed me. However, if it wasn't for that mysterious force hanging me upside down, my shadow happened to enter the range of the water basin, and the intense pain from my spirit diluted that influence, making me struggle a bit and directly break that thin thread, I would probably be hanging dead from the ceiling by now. Altair gave a wry smile. Although the prepared measures worked in a slightly different way, as long as they worked, he had to be extremely grateful. Altair pulled the dagger out of his chest, the blade caught on a bone, and the pain almost made him pass out. After about 2 minutes, the necklace had mostly healed his wound, and he finally recovered, tossing the necklace aside and leaning against the bed, panting heavily. I didn't expect this pendulum to be so dangerous. Mr. World is at least an angel, yet just divining his existence would result in fatal harm. Altair thought wildly as he took off his blood-stained clothes and put on comfortable loungewear. These few small movements made him feel exhausted, and he could only stop to rest. Recalling the information that flashed through his mind the moment he divined, Altair gently exhaled a bloody, turbid breath, sighing in his heart. Although he suffered severe trauma from the divination just now, this divination was not without gains. In fact, it could be said to be quite fruitful. First of all, because his divination ability was not very strong before and he didn't use it often, he wasn't very clear about the dangers of divination. Even though he had seen what Miss Audrey looked like, subconsciously, he still thought that similar things were far from him. But I am now the Empress of the Tarot Club, similar things will happen one after another. This time is a moderate lesson, and this lesson alone is worth it. Do not casually divine things that might involve high-level existences. Altair silently remembered this point in his heart. For an assassin, a lesson is a more valuable compensation than anything else. Here's an explanation. Altair didn't die because the divination pointed to world, and in Klein's setting, world is a favored one of fool when dealing with outsiders, only at the angel rank. This allows him to receive double anchors. Moreover, the male lead has already joined the Tarot Club and has established a connection with Klein to some extent. He is someone Klein has invested in. Klein giving him things is a reward, not a punishment. What's the point of giving him a pendulum only for him to die upon divining? It's like me giving you a box of Legos and then putting a bomb in the instruction manual. There's no need to kill the person you've invested in, right? Furthermore, investment isn't anonymous gifting. After giving a gift, you at least need to let him know who sent it, otherwise, wouldn't it be a wasted investment? Finally, This is also a foreshadowing that will be revealed at the end of the first volume, so please be patient. Chapter 37, Harvest. Secondly, he gained a deeper understanding of the mysterious pendulum. This pendulum was one that Mr. World always carried with him. Due to being carried by a high-level existence for such a long time, it underwent a transformation from an ordinary item into a mystical item. Its main abilities are threefold. First, it provides the wielder with excellent divination capabilities. Not only pendulum divination, but the wielder's other divination methods will also see a leap in improvement. Second, the wielder's relevant information will be concealed to a certain extent, making it impossible for others to divine or predict. This doesn't mean their predictions will fail, but rather that they will conclude the target is perfectly normal. As for the third point, Altair didn't quite understand it, only vaguely perceiving that this pendulum seemed to have some connection with that gray fog. This might be useful in the future, but currently, it doesn't help directly increase his combat power. Furthermore, because Altair had not exited the divination state when he had just come into contact with Mr. World, he instinctively gained some information and knowledge from him. Altair picked up the steel-nibbed fountain pen, whose tip was bent, from the floor and began to write, one by one, on the parchment with a trembling hand. Due to his injuries, his handwriting was a bit messy, but it didn't affect readability. 1. Law of the indestructibility of Beyonder characteristics. Beyonder characteristics will not be destroyed or diminished, they merely transfer from one carrier to another. 2. Law of conservation of Beyonder characteristics within adjacent sequences. If there are more high-sequence Beyonder characteristics, there will be fewer low-sequence ones, and vice versa. 3. Law of Beyonder characteristic aggregation. High-sequence items of the same pathway will intermittently and unconsciously attract low to mid-sequence Beyonders to their vicinity, and they tend to aggregate together. High-sequence Beyonders can perceive this attraction. 4. Beware of the cosmos and the underground. 5. Do as you wish, but do no harm. 6. The crafting technique for the confessor charm. Materials: 1 worm of time, 1 carbonized human skull fossil. Its effect is to revert the state of all things within a certain range to their state 1 minute prior. The sequence of the reverted items must not be higher than the sequence of the worm of time's source. The length of time reverted is also related to the target's sequence. 1 minute is for reverting ordinary objects, while for existences above sequence 4, the reverted time is around 5 seconds. Effective for about 1 year. 7. Seer Potion Formula. Main ingredients: 10 milliliters of lava octopus blood, 50 grams of star crystal. Auxiliary ingredients: 100 milliliters of pure water, 13 drops of night vanilla juice, 7 golden mint leaves, 3 drops of hemlock juice, 9 grams of dragon's blood grass powder. 8. Trickmaster Potion Formula. Beyonder materials: Spirit Eater's stomach, 20 milliliters of deep-sea marlin blood. Auxiliary materials: 5 milliliters of hornbeam essential oil, 10 grams of ball grass powder, 1 blooming red chestnut flower, 80 milliliters of pure water. 9. Astrologer Beyonder materials: crystallized lava octopus blood, 60 grams of meteorite crystal. Auxiliary materials missing. As he recalled this, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his head, followed by an unbearable agony deep within his spiritual body. This made it impossible for him to maintain the state of recollection, and he bit into his sleeve, preventing himself from crying out and attracting Veneda's attention. The curse just now had also caused severe damage to his spiritual body. Altair endured the pain and once again gripped the rose heart necklace, allowing the surging power of growth to spread to every corner of his body, first ensuring his body fully recovered. Then he picked up his blood-stained clothes, planning to secretly wash them after Veneda had fallen asleep. Although he was quite injured, this time it was a huge gain. Altair carefully scrutinized the lines of mystical knowledge on the paper, feeling as if he had learned many important things. High-sequence items or Beyonders of the same pathway will intermittently attract low-sequence Beyonders to them. Altair pondered, seemingly understanding something. In other words, my ability to connect with Gegran and participate in the Beyonder gathering she hosted was also determined by this law. Altair suddenly felt a bit ironic. Beyonders spend their entire lives, yet ultimately they are still at the mercy of fate, drawn together by irresistible mystical laws. But that's none of my business. Altair didn't dwell on it for long. He tossed his blood-stained clothes into the laundry basket and turned to flop onto the bed, falling into a deep sleep. He didn't mind being manipulated or being someone's pawn, as long as the opponent's chess skills weren't too bad. Following his lead was fine. A pawn might indeed jump off the chessboard, but a pawn that jumps off the chessboard also loses its meaning. After an unknown amount of time, Altair slowly woke up. The crimson moonlight shone on his face, making him squint slightly. The clock on the wall showed it was already past 10. So hungry. Altair rubbed his still throbbing forehead. He had just used the heart of the indulgent rose to heal his wounds. Although this mystical item had been processed by Miss Audrey, its negative effects had been largely suppressed, but the nutrients needed to heal the wounds still required timely replenishment by the user. I wonder if Veneda left me anything to eat. Altair mumbled softly, tiptoeing downstairs to the kitchen to make some supper. However, on the dining room table, there were already several covered white porcelain deep dish plates. Altair lifted a lid to find half a plate of creamed potato stew, not particularly appetizing. The cream had already solidified a bit from sitting too long. Sometimes Veneda isn't so annoying after all. Altair mumbled, and by the light of the only night lamp on the wall, he scooped a spoonful of the completely cooled stew, then broke off a piece of white bread, spread the stew on it, and took a big bite. Since she had left him food, he saved himself the effort of making supper. Cleaning the kitchen was tiring. Then, his expression began to twitch. An indescribable taste spread through his mouth, almost making him lose his composure. I always thought that stew was a dish with both a high ceiling and a low floor. After all, as long as you throw things in and cook them, whether sweet or savory, it wouldn't be too bad. In a way, Veneda really gave me a surprise. Altair stared at the plate of stew for a long time, seriously considering if there was any chance of reheating it to save it. Finally, he decided to waste food this one time and poured the strange stew directly into the trash can. The moment the clattering sound of pouring echoed, Altair actually felt a strange sense of relief. After all that trouble, Altair felt even hungrier. At this point, he even somewhat admired Veneda. She had actually eaten half a plate of such food. It's said that the hunter pathway also increases poison resistance. Altair deeply agreed with this. Just as Altair lit the stove, preparing to cook some Feniport noodles for himself, footsteps clattered from upstairs, and Veneda came down in her pajamas. "Did you eat that stew?" Veneda rubbed her eyes and walked towards Altair. It was very good. Don't make it again in the future." Altair bent down to find yellow noodles made from durum wheat in a drawer, using this to hide his expression, and at the same time kicked the trash can under the table, letting the tablecloth block Veneda's view. Since the Wheat Act was promulgated, this wheat product, originally from Feniport, gradually replaced the original Loan wheat. Once most of Feniport's farmers switched to growing wheat, Feniport was thus smoothly tied to Loan's war chariot. However, Altair didn't care about any of this. He only cared that the implementation of this decree, to some extent, also promoted Feniport noodles, a delicious pasta with a chewy texture, especially when paired with rich pesto, which suited his taste. "Why did you use up the pesto I kept in the cabinet?" Altair suddenly found his seasoning bottle empty and turned to ask Veneda. "Your bottle didn't have a label. I thought it was light cream and poured it into the stew," Veneda replied as if it were obvious. "I feel like if I continue to argue with you, I'll just get angry again, so let's just drop it." Altair sullenly shut up, grabbed a small bottle of ketchup, melted butter over low heat, mixed in chopped onions, basil, black pepper, and salt to make a sauce. Then he poured ham and chopped green peppers into the pan to stir fry, mixed them with the noodles cooked in another pan, and served 2 large plates, placing one heavily in front of Veneda. "Do you need to put so many spices? Rich people are just different." Veneda twitched her nose slightly, showing an intoxicated expression, then said with a hint of envy. "You weren't exactly saving money when you poured the sauce." Altair ignored her, didn't even bother to wash the pot, and sat down at the table, starting to tackle his plate of Feniport noodles. "Every time I write chapters like this, I'm always hungry." Sigh. Thus, Altair and Veneta completed their final preparations before entering the world after the Twilight Emblem. Chapter 38, Exploration. The next day, Altair and Veneta, armed with their prepared weapons, cautiously made their way through the streets to the Harvest Church at the end of Rose Street, where they met Sister Vesper, who had been waiting for them early in the church. "Thank the Mother Goddess, you're finally here." Sister Vesper first breathed a sigh of relief, then turned her gaze to Altair, scrutinizing him carefully. Although her gaze was undisguised, it was surprisingly not impolite. At the same time, Altair covertly observed Sister Vesper's attire. Today, Sister Vesper was not wearing her usual simple nun's habit in the church antechamber, but was instead waiting directly in the basement where the vampire had once been imprisoned, clad in heavy armor. It was a suit of plate armor that looked extremely heavy. The large metal plate on the chest was forged into an arched dome, perfectly accommodating Sister Vesper's ample bosom. In fact, this design was to prevent the wearer from suffocating if the armor was struck and deformed. Every component of the armor was much thicker and heavier than the plate armor previously used by the Loan army, shimmering with an orange-red spirituality glow, and a massive God of Combat holy emblem was painted on the chest. In Sister Vesper's hands was a long-handled warhammer, over a meter in length. Unlike the hammers Altair had seen at Beander gatherings, this warhammer wasn't excessively large, but compared to those with exaggerated hammerheads, this one looked more dangerous. The narrow hammerhead and the tip of the metal grip both had bird beak-shaped spikes over 30 centimeters long, and the sides of the hammer also had two spikes about 5 centimeters long. Although this long-handled hammer was inconspicuous compared to the massive armor, Altair understood that both the plate armor and the warhammer, even without considering the mystical effects brought by their Beander characteristic, were extremely excellent battlefield weapons. Imagine a heavily armored nun, clad in massive plate armor and wielding a long-handled warhammer, charging into enemy lines at a speed similar to a full-speed steam train. It's likely no one could maintain their sanity. "Sister Vesper, with you dressed like this, are you also coming in with us?" Veneta asked curiously. "No, this armor is also one of the God of Combat's blessings. Through this armor, I can respond to the holy emblems in your hands." Sister Vesper smiled kindly. "If anything unexpected happens to you inside, I can use this connection to perform a summoning ritual and pull you back into the real world. However, this summoning isn't precise enough. It might summon all creatures within a certain range to reality, so I need to be ready for battle at all times." Sister Vesper raised the warhammer in her hand and smiled easily, as if the weapon, which looked to weigh almost 10 kilograms, was nothing to her. "So, since you're both here, let's confirm our agreement again." Sister Vesper said impatiently, "You will enter the Twilight Country and help me find clues related to the God of Combat's current situation. As for your reward, I've already paid it in advance. Mr. Altair, if you still want any additional reward, I can also give you some monetary compensation, estimated not to be less than 1,000 pounds. I think that's a reasonable price. Of course, if you can't produce that much cash immediately, you could consider substituting all the blood of a black abyss devil fish or an agate peacock egg. While this might exceed the promised reward, if you truly have these two materials, I can make up the difference." Altair nodded, indicating no objection. "Rest assured, my financial situation is quite good." Sister Vesper nodded slightly, then carefully took out the holy emblem from a box by the table. "If you're ready, we can start now. The method of use is simple. Just inject spirituality, and let the light emitted by the holy emblem envelop both of you. After that, I will temporarily transfer the right to use the holy emblem to you through ritual magic, with the effect lasting until you leave the Twilight Country." Altair slightly moved his wrist, adjusted the position of his underarm gun holster, and gently rotated the bronze ring on his right hand. He then spread his hands, indicating he was ready, while Veneda also confirmed her own status and, with a slight nervousness, nodded to Sister Vesper. Then, "May glory be with you." Sister Vesper solemnly handed the holy emblem to Veneda. The moment they exchanged it, a golden barrier seemed to appear at Sister Vesper's feet, and an indescribable aura peeled away from Sister Vesper's body, empowering Veneda. "You can use the holy emblem now." Sister Vesper raised the warhammer to her chest and performed a standard knight's salute. "I will pray for you until you return. I always feel that the Church of the God of War's blessing is a bit ominous." It was a very serious occasion, yet Altair unseasonably had such a thought. Although the God of Combat's authority also included aspects of glory, most people who heard the blessing, "May glory be with you," didn't live long. While Altair was still lost in thought, Veneda had already taken the holy emblem and slowly began to inject spirituality. A solid, twilight-colored pillar of light erupted from the holy emblem, slowly expanding its range, finally stopping its expansion within a 1-meter radius. After Veneda moved the holy emblem away, the pillar of light did not follow, but instead seemed to solidify, remaining in place in a radial pattern. Did it fix the light? The Twilight Country is truly a mystical place. Altair and Veneda exchanged glances, then stepped into the area enveloped by the light. As a flash of light that slowed their thoughts passed, the two were transported into a completely unfamiliar world. After an unknown amount of time, Altair felt his senses return, his feet once again on solid ground. He slowly opened his eyes, and what met them was a dim orange-red. He seemed to have landed on the edge of a forest and for a moment couldn't determine if anyone lived nearby. A large amount of information flooded his mind, and his physical state also seemed vastly different from before, forcing him to temporarily halt his movements and adapt to these changes. "My physical condition seems to have become stronger. Even without Beander means, I can directly tear my former self apart. Some fighting techniques and weapon usage skills have also improved, and I've gained the ability to shape light-based weapons." It seems Sister Vesper's words weren't an exaggeration. Altair slowly clenched and tightened his hands, making his entire skeleton crackle. When he released his grip, a Loan gold coin he had been holding in his palm was forcefully crushed into a lump of alloy. Just the full grip of his hand was similar to the pressure of a hydraulic press. Altair was astonished by the surge in power and couldn't help but wonder just how strong Sister Vesper truly was. At the very least, she could definitely face-on collide with a full-speed steam train, or tear open the hull of an ironclad ship with her bare hands, or even directly grab the machine gun barrel of a low-flying airship by jumping, and that's without any assistance or mystical items. Altair thought about the scene and suddenly felt a chill down his spine. Although the warrior pathway was somewhat weak in the mystical aspect, on the front lines of battle, it was an absolutely terrifying existence. No wonder Loan invested so many Beyonders back then, yet was still pushed all the way to Backland by Fosak's Church of the God of War. Not long after, Altair forcibly ended his boundless musings and instead looked around, breathing a slight sigh of relief after seeing Veneda's figure. Although her current strength was even greater than his own, they were in a completely unfamiliar environment, and neither Altair nor Veneda believed their individual strength could flatten this Twilight Country. Therefore, from any perspective, preventing casualties was an essential matter. After confirming her normal state, Altair began to examine the surrounding environment. This was unlike Backland. An assassin inevitably felt constrained in a completely unfamiliar environment. This seemed to be the edge of a forest, and this forest was composed of trees with white bark and small serrations around their leaves. The tree shadows covered the sky, but a constant, unchanging orange-red spirituality light evenly illuminated every corner, directly sending the surrounding scene into Altair and Veneda's eyes through spirituality resonance. They could see, even with their eyes closed. Normal natural light, however, was frozen by a mystical power, as if it had aged and died in the endless spiritual twilight. This, aging, light swirled throughout the divine kingdom, forming orange-red clumps like mist. It was the first time the two had encountered such a strange environment, and for a moment, they were so shocked they didn't know what to do. Chapter 39, The Divine Kingdom. This place is indeed very strange. Veneda subtly moved closer to Altair, her index finger lightly resting on the trigger guard of her steam rifle. Let's first confirm our surroundings, then quickly begin exploring. We don't know if the flow of time inside and outside is the same, so rashly deciding to stay here is very dangerous. Altair nodded in agreement, stepping back 2 paces, signaling Veneda to use her hunter abilities to find a way out. Veneda stepped forward 2 paces, first adjusting her position, looking at the sun in the sky, then bending down to observe the plants growing at the base of the trees, turning over stones to carefully look for tiny traces. After about 5 minutes, she stood up, brushing the dirt from her hands. "How is it?" Altair asked impatiently. "Does that even need saying?" Veneda spread her hands. "Absolutely no way. Why are you so proud then?" Altair's temple throbbed with anger. After a long moment, he exhaled, trying to keep his voice calm. "Haven't you already advanced? Finding a path in a forest should be a hunter's specialty." Altair forced his tone to become gentle. "A hunter's abilities have their limits, what are you thinking?" Veneda didn't take Altair's provocation seriously. "The sunlight here is stagnant, and plant growth seems to rely on that mysterious spirituality glow. That glow is evenly distributed in every corner of the Twilight Country, so there's no difference in plant growth. In other words, the environmental characteristics here are completely different from the outside world, and any related experience is meaningless. I just tried to perform a small pathfinding ritual magic using the wild plants here as materials, but this place seems to isolate spirituality to some extent. The spirituality contained in the orange-red twilight directly blocked the path of my ritual. Since even this rare pathfinding ritual magic of the hunter pathway is useless, I have no other options." Altair frowned. This space was much vaster than he had imagined. If they relied on searching on foot, who knew how long it would take? Although Altair's education was limited to church school, he understood that if light was also static, people couldn't see things. Their current method of perception relied entirely on their spiritual intuition resonating with the surrounding spiritual environment. Limited by the range of spirituality, their visual range was only a circle with a radius of 20 meters. Although Veneda's sequence was higher, her sequence was not known for its spiritual intensity, so her actual field of vision was only about 30 meters in radius. Even if they wanted to climb high and look far, they wouldn't be able to see anything. "This is a bit difficult," Altair lightly tapped his temple with his finger. However, the unexpected hard object he felt made his eyes light up. He quickly unfastened the pendulum hanging from his wrist and began to silently recite a prayer in Hermes language. "I actually forgot about this. I hope this pendulum, which came from the world mister, who is likely an angelic existence, can be of some use." Altair finished his silent prayer, somewhat nervously returning his attention to the pendulum. The citrine pendant remained still for a moment, then slowly began to swing in one direction, with a small but exceptionally steady amplitude. "Fortunately, it's working," Altair secretly let out a long sigh of relief. It was a good thing he brought this pendulum, otherwise, they would have to blindly stumble through. Although Sister Vesper hadn't restricted the number of entries or duration in the Twilight Country, staying too long in such an unfamiliar environment was extremely dangerous. This danger not only came from potential monsters in the unfamiliar environment, but merely maintaining the exchange of matter and spirituality for too long in this environment would bring additional risks to Altair and Veneda, who did not belong here. For example, currently, Altair and Veneda could directly obtain spirituality from the environment to use their Beyander abilities, but these Beyander abilities and spirituality did not seem to carry over to the outside. If they depleted their spirituality here, even with the replenishment from the Twilight, there was a high possibility of directly facing the risk of losing control due to the disappearance of false spirituality after leaving. After about 4 or 5 hours, Veneda and Altair were still traversing the dense forest. This forest, filled with orange-red spiritual mist, seemed endless. Within the range of their spiritual intuition, there were always white trees like towering giant swords. Occasionally, they could hear a few strange bird calls, but due to the distance, Altair and Veneta couldn't perceive what they looked like. It was a strange experience, especially losing sight all at once, then being endowed with a completely new sense, and yet understanding this sense perfectly, as if this way of perceiving was the original one. Are you sure your divination isn't wrong? Veneta asked Altair suspiciously again. This was not the first time she had asked similar questions. It's not that I don't believe you, it's just that I've seen too many men in the East Borough who were confident at first but ended up having problems. Alright, I really don't know why an old maid like you, who hasn't even had a boyfriend, likes to talk dirty like others. Altair retorted irritably, just keep quiet for now, as for whether I can perform, you can come find me tonight to discuss similar issues. Damn it, how did you know? The hunter lady's expression suddenly became very interesting. Gegran told me, Altair said without turning his head. Of course, this wasn't because he was acting cool, but because when perceiving through spiritual intuition, he could see, even without turning his head. Quote exclamation mark. Why does she tell everything? Veneta's face flushed to her ears, but fortunately, it wasn't too obvious under the spiritual light here. Have you forgotten her nickname? Altair suppressed a smile. But I'm not bored enough to ask such questions. I was just tricking you. Gegran only told me that you like to talk dirty. Veneta made a sound like a kitten whose tail had been stepped on, then quietly continued on her way without speaking again. HMPH, trying to compete with me. Altair shook his head. His world was finally quiet. In the vast world, only the pattering sound of their footsteps on dry leaves remained. However, not long after the two stopped speaking and walked quietly, Veneta suddenly stopped, closed her eyes, as if listening carefully to something. Did you find anything? Seeing this, Altair no longer cared about the previous awkwardness and stepped forward to ask. There's the sound of water ahead, like a river passing through. Veneta said, her face slightly red, her voice an octave lower. To be honest, when she was quiet and didn't speak, she was quite pretty upon closer inspection. Altair was stunned, his thoughts drifting to strange places again. Is this what they call, such a good girl, too bad she has a mouth. The trial promotion starts next week. I'm required to write at least 4,000 characters daily, so I'm trying 2 updates a day for the next 2 days, each over 2,000 characters. I'll see how it goes this week. The upcoming Twilight Country dungeon has been quite controversial, and I plan to make corresponding revisions in April when my schedule is more relaxed. New readers can skip directly to chapter 54, it won't affect later reading for now. I didn't expect this book to get a contract at the time, and the outline has undergone some changes, so I hope everyone understands. Chapter 40, The River. Upon finding the River of Light Consumption, the two were somewhat excited, because once the River of Light Consumption was found, it was very likely to find related settlements by going upstream. If there were really indigenous people in this strange place, finding them might save them a lot of detours. This excitement made the two temporarily forget their previous awkwardness and hurried towards the direction of the water sound. However, after only a few steps, Altair suddenly stopped and pulled Veneta. What are you doing? Veneta's expression was a little strange, and she shook off Altair's hand rather unnaturally. However, Altair had no intention of arguing with her, he just pointed to the trees beside them with a serious expression. Pay attention to the color of the tree trunks. Veneta focused her attention in the direction Altair was pointing. Although they both had nearly 360 degrees vision in their spirituality state, if their attention was not focused in a certain direction, what they saw was not as clear as with their naked eyes. The trunk of the sword-shaped giant tree was not the same ash color as the giant trees they had seen before. If one observed carefully, they would find a hint of bluish-black in the bark, and a strange spirituality surged within the tree. Is it because the tree roots absorb different moisture? Veneta immediately reacted. As a hunter, her understanding of similar knowledge was no less than Altair's, and even better, but her state was not good just now, but it was normal to think about it. Not only that, the fallen leaves here have also become thicker. Altair said thoughtfully, the river of light consumption ahead might have a problem. Let's approach carefully. Veneda threw the rose heart necklace to Altair. Your sequence is lower, it's safer to have this. Altair did not reject it. The two prepared themselves and walked cautiously towards the river of light consumption. Along the way, the symptoms of the trees became more and more severe, from just a faint hint of white in the bark at first, to the entire tree gradually turning bluish-black from the inside out, and finally only a withered black trunk remained. Occasionally, various bones and body parts of different creatures could be seen along the way, with rusty traces left by the twilight mist in their skeletons. They lay there silently, as if their very existence had been weathered by death. Altair poked them with his short sword, and they collapsed, white ashes falling like broken snow. Altair and Veneda continued to walk forward, step by step. The illusory sound of water in their ears grew louder and louder, but nothing appeared, and the two never saw the riverbank. I say, Altair. Veneda suddenly spoke again from behind Altair. Her voice was a little hoarse, like gears that had stopped turning for a long time. How far is that river of light consumption from us? I'll do another divination, Altair said, taking off the pendulum on his hand, preparing to divine the direction again. However, at this moment, Altair suddenly noticed that the bronze ring on his finger had somehow been covered with a layer of grayish-white, frost-like substance. Altair reached out and touched it, and the mystical item, Otilia's paradox ring, which had cost him nearly 2,000 pounds, equivalent to a quasi-sequence 6 item, silently shattered like burnt incense ash. Run! Altair shouted, quickly throwing off the heavy revolver rifle on him, and like a nimble leopard, he sprinted wildly in the opposite direction of the water sound. Veneda immediately followed closely. Behind the two, the increasingly loud sound of water pursued them relentlessly like a persistent illness. Due to their spirituality vision, the two could see the scene behind them even without turning their heads. A thin, grayish-white mist surged from the darkness at the end of their vision, combining with the illusory river water, expanding into a grayish-white light water closer to mist. In the middle of the light water was a lightless deep darkness, a pure black tributary flowing in the middle of the river of light consumption, completely incompatible with the surrounding river water, like the Emperor's forbidden army driving a slave army to hunt their prey. Scenes formed by the feedback of spirituality light constantly appeared in their minds, and then were swallowed by the grayish-white tide, even this impression being swept into the irresistible grayish-white tide. The package Altair threw away, died, the moment it was swept by the gray tide. All mechanical structures lost their original functions and turned into loose white tissue like those skeletons. The trees behind them were protected by the power of twilight, and although they were not immediately pulverized, the twilight light on their surface dimmed another layer. This river of light consumption flowing with death was actually alive. We were actually very close to the bank of that river of light consumption, but our spirituality used for exploration died the moment it touched the river water, failing to give us feedback, which made us think we never reached the bank. Altair quickly ran while rapidly assessing the situation in his mind. At this moment, the two were less than 20 meters from the water flow, and two tributaries had already caught up on both sides, almost side by side with the two, intending to directly encircle them. Even with their strengthened sequence 5-leg strength, the distance to the tide was still slowly but surely shortening. Damn it! Veneda yelled in frustration, quickly caught up with Altair, and in his cry of surprise, she picked him up by the waist and suddenly hoisted him onto her shoulder. Oh my god! Before Altair's cry of surprise landed, golden red flames suddenly shot up from Veneda's body, enveloping Altair and Veneda like a torrent of fire, then turning into a blazing light that surged forward. The grayish-white river water and the aura of death flew back behind them, and the two grayish-white river tributaries collided behind them with a roar. The splashing water almost splashed onto Altair's face. Fortunately, he turned his head in time to avoid it, and a grayish-white edged hole instantly appeared on his clothes. After rushing out about 60 to 70 meters, Veneda suddenly exerted force in her waist and threw Altair forward. Altair quickly cooperated, landing and rolling twice to dissipate the force. then immediately got up and ran forward, his speed undiminished. "Next time, please give me a heads up first," Altair shouted at Veneta while running. "Save that for the river of light consumption behind us. Flame sprint won't last many more times. If we can't shake off that river water, we'll both be finished here today," Veneta retorted without showing weakness. Just then, a loud roar came from the sky. A huge griffin beast swooped down with a flexibility completely inconsistent with its massive body, its wings fanning a violent gust of wind. Following the momentum of the dive, it traced an arc close to the ground, and its two eagle-like front claws grabbed Altair and Veneta by the back of their collars, pulling them into the air. They were pulled into the air just in the nick of time, narrowly escaping before the river water engulfed their previous position. Altair looked down at the raging gray flood below his feet with lingering fear, and finally breathed a sigh of relief. Just then, a straightforward-sounding male voice came from the griffin's back, speaking in giant language that Altair didn't understand. "What is he saying?" Altair asked Veneta, the university student beside him. Although he had also crammed mystical knowledge, giant language was clearly outside his scope of knowledge. "He said we're the most fearless guys he's ever seen, daring to approach the river of light consumption." Veneta translated, "He also hopes we'll go back to their outpost with him. They are currently fighting a terrifying existence they call the Eternal Night Demon Wolf, and they need people like us to join." Veneta answered the other party's question in giant language, and the other party seemed very happy. Hearty laughter came from the griffin's back. "I just agreed to his request, he's very happy." Veneta continued to translate. "He said we can call him Badhale." Chapter 41, Indigenous People. Badhale, Altair recalled carefully, confirming that this was neither a Loan nor a Fosak name. The other party likely wasn't from the outside world like himself, nor were his ancestors. In other words, the indigenous people here seemed to possess their own unique culture, which differed to some extent from the major imperial cultures currently on the eastern continent. Altair tried to communicate with Badhale using Hermes language and the little clumsy elven language he knew. However, the other party seemed completely unfamiliar with the former, and could only understand a few short words of the latter. After all, each elven word has an exceptionally rich meaning, and the learning difficulty might still be too high for this seemingly honest and simple warrior. After shaking off the grayish-white tide, Badhale lowered his flying speed, allowing Veneta and Altair to find an opportunity to climb onto the back of the griffin. It was then that the two finally saw Badhale's full appearance. This was a warrior with long, powerful limbs, clad in silver armor that exuded a sense of decay, with fur collars lining the inside, visible through the gaps in the armor. His face was hidden beneath a silver visor, with faint orange-red light emanating from the armor's crevices. On his back, he carried an exaggerated greatsword. Its heavy blade was crudely embedded into the bone of some giant beast, forming a slightly curved, deformed weapon. "That was my trophy once." Noticing their gaze, Badhale chuckled honestly. Before the Eternal Night Demon Wolf and the people of darkness she led appeared, another force threatened the Twilight people, whom we called the Pale People or Feathered Folk. Their eyes are very special, unlike us, who can see far by relying on spiritual perception and the guidance of griffins. They can flap their wings and fly to very high places, shooting us down like rabbits. He paused for a moment after speaking, waiting for Veneta to translate the giant language for Altair. Their leader was a feathered serpent as vast as a mountain, whose name was Quetzal. The feathered folk called him the Pale Emperor. He occupied the ash tree at the center of the Twilight Country, and his flowing venom transformed into the river of light consumption you just saw. He was a terrifying monster. In his prime, merely flapping his wings was enough to obscure the sky of the Twilight Country. After a long and bitter struggle, the Eternal Night Demon Wolf and I joined forces to slay him, and we fashioned the hilt of this greatsword from his largest snake bone. Badhale proudly reached out and patted the greatsword on his back, but then his tone became somewhat indignant. At that time, the Pale Emperor's legacy was collectively sealed by the Twilight people and the people of darkness, and the river of light consumption also ceased to flow. But later, that cunning demonic wolf began secretly studying the Pale Emperor's legacy, causing the river of light consumption to reappear on the land. To stop this fellow and prevent her from further destroying the Twilight Country, I intend to lead the Twilight people to contend with her. How strong is that eternal night demon wolf? Roughly what sequence? Veneda cautiously asked in giant language. What sequence? Badhale was momentarily stunned. Is that how you judge strength? I only know that she wields the power of darkness. I've sparred with her many times, we are evenly matched, but it's hard to say if she inherited anything from the Pale Emperor's legacy. If that's the case, I might not be as strong as her. Then how dare you lead the Twilight people to counterattack her, instead of leading them to find another way out? Veneda asked curiously. To retreat without a fight is a warrior's disgrace. Moreover, this time I have an ally on my level, and you too. Badhale laughed heartily once more. I can tell that you two are also warriors favored by Twilight, probably only one level weaker than me. And that demonic wolf has already been abandoned by her kin due to studying the Pale Emperor's legacy, with almost no warriors of her level remaining. 4 against 1, the advantage is mine. Rest assured, a guardian will not let his companions die. You mean, you have another companion? Altair immediately caught the information in his words and quickly urged Veneda to press for details. However, this time Badhale did not answer directly, but instead looked forward. Our camp is almost there, you will soon see that ally. Although we are allies, our relationship is not very good in reality. She is nominally my mother, but we are not related by blood. Altair and Veneda exchanged glances, unsure whether to continue asking. Fortunately, Badhale was not the type to keep things bottled up, and after a while, he couldn't help but tell the two. Simply put, the power of us Twilight people all comes from the Twilight glow in the Twilight Country. The more Twilight power a warrior can draw, the stronger he becomes. However, as the Twilight power drawn increases, we will become more and more akin to that eternal Twilight glow, decaying, corrupting, and eventually our minds will fall silent, becoming part of the Twilight mist. Only strong emotions, ties similar to blood relations, can help us maintain ourselves in the face of Twilight's power. So, I need such a relationship to maintain my sanity, even if I know this woman before me is not my mother, and she knows that I know this, we still interact like an ordinary mother and son. At the critical moment of the decisive battle, I need to maintain this relationship even more. At this point, Badhale looked at the two with a hint of envy and said, as fellow warriors, your bond with each other is truly enviable. I once had similar companions, but unfortunately, she couldn't maintain herself and became a part of Twilight. No, our symptoms haven't reached the point where we need similar bonds to maintain our will, and you seem to have misunderstood our relationship. Altair wanted to retort, but then remembered that he and the other party didn't speak the same language, so he could only look at Veneda, hoping she would explain. Veneda's face subtly flushed, and she quietly explained a few words to Badhale. Badhale showed a look of sudden realization, laughed twice heartily, and heavily patted Altair's shoulder twice, showing an encouraging expression. As Altair was wondering, the griffin beneath them suddenly lowered its altitude, passing through the fiery clouds, and below it was a small camp with cooking smoke rising. The architectural style here was very ancient. Large tents made of animal skins and temporary dwellings built from earth and stone were scattered like stars, possessing a primitive beauty. We've arrived, welcome to the glorious abode of the Twilight people. Badhale smiled and gestured with his arm, we'll rest for a night, and tomorrow we'll settle things with that demonic wolf. Chapter 42, Analysis Bonus Chapter. Altair and Veneda dismounted the griffins, accompanied by Badhale, and stretched their bodies, which had stiffened from the cold wind at high altitudes. Although Veneda could use flames to warm herself, they were worried about scaring the griffins, so they hadn't dared to make any sudden moves. Now on the ground, the two quickly started moving their bodies to avoid affecting their combat readiness later. At the same time, they couldn't help but look around curiously. This seemed to be a temporary camp, with fully armed giant warriors stationed approximately every 10 meters. Although they weren't as tall as Badhale, who was nearly 5 meters, almost all of them were over 4 meters, making Altair and Veneta, who were not short themselves, seem small in comparison. They all wore heavy metal armor, wielding great swords or warhammers, standing majestically in their respective positions, only greeting Badhale warmly when he approached. "You two can stay here for now, it's still early for dinner, and someone will notify you when it's time." After a friendly greeting with another robust Twilight people, Badhale led the two to their designated tent. "Because this march was rather hasty, we won't be setting up a new camp for you. Fortunately, you are relatively small, and this tent was originally for us Twilight people, so it won't be too cramped for the two of you. Make yourselves at home, no one will disturb you before dinner." With that, he gave Altair a meaningful look, then laughed loudly and left. "Did you or did you not explain our relationship to him?" Altair finally couldn't hold back and confirmed with Veneta. "Isn't that the most important thing right now?" Veneta rolled her eyes at him, the corner of her mouth seeming to curl up slightly. "Let's first organize the information we've gathered and write it down so we don't forget." With that, she found a light-colored animal skin the size of a chopping board in the drawer of the huge wooden table in the tent. Clearly, this tribe had not learned the art of papermaking. She picked up a dip pen as thick as a rolling pin, dipped it in what appeared to be blood-made ink, and began to record. "Badhale is very kind to us, seemingly because of this Twilight emblem. There's no concept of meander pathway here, they judge friend or foe based on the type of power they draw upon. The spirituality here is very abundant, even ordinary people, as long as they possess sufficient authority, can draw power equivalent to Sequence 5 from the Twilight." Altair stood beside her, occasionally adding a few words and offering some insights. "Did you notice, Badhale mentioned earlier that they need to rely on certain strong emotions to resist the Twilight's assimilation of them. Have you thought of anything similar?" Altair asked thoughtfully. "This is similar to the out-of-control situations we fight against." Veneta immediately reacted, his description just now also had similar information to corroborate this point. "Then can we assume that while this place seems unrelated to reality, it actually shares some common rules with the real world? Not natural laws, but rules of mysticism, only twisted by the Twilight here to affect the real world in a different form." Altair's tone gradually became excited. "If that's truly the case, then does it prove that everything here has a corresponding symbol in the real world, and perhaps even represents the god of combat's personal experiences? Furthermore, the River of Light consumption is also worth noting," Veneta added. "It might point to the death that died during the Fourth Epochs, Pale Calamity, and Badhale's description of Quetzal largely fits this." Actually, when I met Miss Pride yesterday, she told me something." Altair thought for a moment and decided to tell Veneta about it. "She said that if we couldn't find relevant clues, I could tell Sister Vesper that I am a believer of the Evernight Goddess." "You are a believer of the Evernight Goddess? What does that mean?" As expected, Veneta first froze, then suddenly covered her mouth, her face filled with astonishment. After a long while, she managed to force out a sentence through her spread fingers. "Are we now?" "That's right," Altair said decisively. "If my speculation is correct, we seem to be experiencing these historical events in a special way. The true history concerning the reasons for the fall of the gods. The character suspected to be god of combat Badhale and the suspected goddess, the eternal night demon Wolf, once joined forces to kill the death of the Fourth Epoch, who he referred to as the Pale Emperor, and the goddess gained some benefit from it, forcing Badhale to turn against the goddess. Is this the true reason for the War of Faith? Although these events should not have actually happened, as the son of the Giant King, the god of combat was a Sequence 2 mythical creature from birth, so there wouldn't be such an image of him barely touching the threshold of Sequence 4 only by drawing power from the Twilight. However, this should be a symbolic treatment, like actors in an opera, who may not be as wise and powerful as the true dramatic characters, but the story they tell is no different. However, compared to a historical drama, what we are currently experiencing is more like a satirical play that tells a story through symbols and illusions." Altair gently tapped the wooden table. This was a backland custom. When encountering seemingly unsolvable ominous matters, one could tap wooden objects to ward off bad luck. The ring of Odious is gone. Even if Sister Vesper compensates me this time, I'll still be at a slight loss. Unless Miss Audrey can give me some more rewards, otherwise I probably won't break even this time. Altair forced himself to think about some less important things, trying to distract himself. If I help Badhale deal with that existence, which is likely a symbol of the goddess, will I be directly killed by the goddess's divine punishment after leaving the Twilight Divine Kingdom? Altair felt a bit uneasy and wavered. At this moment, he suddenly remembered his pendulum, quickly untied it from his hand, and began to divine whether he would be in mortal danger if he followed Badhale's command. After silently reciting 7 times, he refocused his attention and found the pendulum rotating clockwise, with a large amplitude and fast speed. There is considerable danger, but if handled properly, it won't be life-threatening. Altair pondered for a while, then picked up the pendulum again and changed the divinatory statement to whether he would be in mortal danger if he did not participate in this matter. To his astonishment, this time the pendulum still rotated clockwise, with an extremely large amplitude and very fast speed, almost tearing itself from his wrist. I've unknowingly fallen into such a grave situation. Altair sighed regretfully. P.S. Starting from tomorrow for 2 days, the author's book will be on a trial recommendation, so I will try to maintain 2 chapters, or 4,000 words, of updates every day. Please don't hold back your recommendation tickets, monthly tickets, and rewards. Next week's data must be boosted high. Thank you everyone. Chapter 43, Interlude. Looking at the rapidly spinning pendulum in his hand, Altair fell into deep thought. His divination skills had improved with the enhancement of the pendulum, but the consumption of spirituality would not decrease due to his proficiency in divination. If he continued to meticulously divine every single matter, the possibility of encountering a high-level existence was not low, and it would also be a significant burden on his spirituality. It seems I must make some trade-offs. Altair pondered for a while, but still decided to perform one last divination. He took a deep breath, letting the pendulum hang naturally. Then, he slowly chanted the divination phrase 7 times in his mind. I should follow Badhale. I should follow Badhale. ... After 7 repetitions, Altair focused his attention on the position of the pendulum and found it slowly and steadily rotating clockwise. This indicated that he should follow the leader of the Twilight people, Badhale, who was suspected to be some kind of consciousness projection of the god of combat. The divination ended, and Altair, preoccupied, rewrapped the pendulum around his wrist. Veneda, seeing that he had finished his divination, quickly leaned in to ask about the result. How did it turn out? Veneda sat down beside Altair. All the furniture in the tent was made to the standards of the Twilight Giant. The edge of the bed was nearly a meter off the ground, and only the small stool Altair was sitting on was somewhat comfortable. The divination shows that we should continue to follow Badhale, but the upcoming events will be very dangerous, requiring every step to be handled correctly, otherwise there's a high probability we'll lose our lives. Altair replied without lifting his head, and sniffed twice. By the way, you use too much conditioner. That bottle is Moon brand conditioner produced by White Company. It has a very strong peppermint scent. Don't you find it choking? None of your business. It's not like, Veneda was about to subconsciously retort, it's not like it's your money, but halfway through, she realized she was indeed using Altair's things, so she had to change the subject. You actually know so much about these things. You don't look like someone who lives in the East Borough at all. Veneda carefully scrutinized Altair. Or, are you actually a playboy who's very good at charming women, which is why you're so sensitive to such matters? You know everything, don't you? Altair rolled his eyes at Veneda, annoyed. It's just for acting. My sequence 8 is instigator. To act this sequence, one needs to frequently tempt others, making them make decisions that go against their true intentions. This is a sequence that produces many fraudsters. Quite a few people use their sequence abilities to make others lose everything. So you dress yourself up nicely to trick people into investing in your fictional projects. Or to seduce married noblewomen. Veneda looked at Altair with the gaze one would reserve for social scum. What are you thinking? Altair reached out and lightly tapped her head. It does have something to do with those noble ladies, but it's not as bad as you imagine. I worked as an assistant for a while at Madame Patif's beauty salon, a beauty establishment frequently visited by noble young ladies and madams. Currently, the old noble families of Loan are not doing very well. Some minor nobles with shallow foundations can no longer afford their previous extravagance after the war, including professional makeup artists and dress maids, but they don't want to lose face in front of their noble peers, so they come to places like this for beauty treatments before attending necessary social events. For those newly promoted nobles, such salons are also an excellent place to build a network. Heh. Emperor Rosal once said that the noble social scene is like a battlefield, but it's not just gentlemen participating, noble young ladies and madams also have their own wars. And I am the arms dealer in this war without gunpowder. Altair spread his hands. If I didn't understand the complex classifications of cosmetics, how could I get those noble ladies who wanted to climb the social ladder to lie on the beauty chair? If I didn't understand those styling designs that make one look more sensual, how could I make their husbands pay obediently? In a sense, you really are an utterly wicked fellow. Veneda was stunned by the unexpected answer. She opened her mouth, and finally only managed to blurt out such a sentence. The light intensity in the Twilight Country never changed, so the residents there judged time by the ash trees growing in the forest. The Twilight people would take branches of ash trees of a certain thickness, make a cut with a knife every 2 centimeters or so, then light them, extinguishing the flames to leave only sparks similar to incense. Altair roughly compared it with his pocket watch, and each mark burned for about 15 minutes. After the ash tree branch in the room burned for about 4 marks, a burly Twilight person came to Altair's and Veneda's tent and said something in giant language, which Veneda also responded to in giant language. He said it's time to eat, and that we should fill our stomachs first. 32 marks later, it will be time to conquer the demonic wolf. Veneda translated for Altair, then curiously asked the giant, I haven't seen any beasts of the Twilight Country around here. What do you usually eat? Do you hunt? We Twilight people are not good at cultivating crops or hunting, we are only good at combat. The other party said proudly, the food we usually eat is a product called mana, obtained through a prayer ritual created by the mother. As long as you add a request during prayer, you can taste mana of various flavors. That amazing. Veneda showed an appropriate expression of surprise. Your mother sounds very powerful, able to create a ritual with such astonishing effects. Of course, the mother is Chief Badhile's mother, and the earth element she commands is always the Twilight people's best ally. As long as their feet are on the ground, and they are in the eternal twilight, the glorious Twilight people are an unconquerable existence. Admiration appeared on the other party's face. The renown of the Twilight people can spread throughout the entire Divine Kingdom, the Mother's contribution is indispensable. When Lord Badhale defeats the demonic wolf, the Mother will probably be able to turn that place shrouded in darkness into a fertile land full of mana. Veneda and Altair exchanged glances, and Veneda was the one who spoke up and asked. May I ask what your mother's name is? Didn't Lord Badhale tell you? The Twilight person said enthusiastically, she is the wife of His Majesty the Old Giant King. When you meet her later, you can address her as Omibarella. Chapter 44, Banquet. Congratulations to EDG, tonight we are all pig awful. Altair and Veneda, led by a Twilight person, arrived at the bonfire in the center of the camp, where hundreds of Twilight giants and another species they had never seen before had already gathered. Their height was not as imposing as the Twilight giants, they averaged only about 1.6 meters tall. The group was predominantly female, dressed in garments woven from fresh flowers and some kind of tough plant fiber. The leaves were stitched together with tanned plant veins, and the decorative flowers seemed to have been specially treated, as they not only didn't wither but also changed color and opened or closed according to their owner's emotions. These people had pointed ears similar to elves and long white hair, which they let fall freely like a waterfall, without using hairpins or similar adornments. Their skin was brown, with a rich, earthy texture, soft but not loose, making one want to poke it to see if it would sink in like soil. They are the mother's families, brown elves, the twilight person who had guided them earlier introduced enthusiastically. This species is exclusively female, created by the mother using ancient life alchemy techniques. After they fall in love with each other, they go to the mother's altar to pray, separating a portion of each of the two mothers' souls, and giving birth to the next generation at the altar of the earth. This species is completely unknown to the outside world. Veneda and Altair walked over curiously and sat down at the brown elves' table. This wasn't because they disliked the twilight giants, but simply because the height difference was too great. Their necks had become a bit sore from talking to the twilight giant on the way. After a while, Badhale slowly walked to the head seat. Beside him was a voluptuous woman wearing a floor-length gown woven from deep green vines and various medicinal herbs and flowers. Her form was similar to the brown elves, yet her stature was not at all shorter than Badhale's. "That is Her Excellency Omibrella, the twilight person," Cleos whispered to Altair beside him. Although Altair and Veneda had taken seats with the brown elves, the giant from earlier was still next to Altair because his seat was at the far end. And he happened to speak Elven language, allowing Altair to communicate with him somewhat. Omibrella and Badhale sat down in the center of the crowd. As soon as the two leaders were seated, the camp immediately quieted down. Everyone, as if by prior agreement, stopped what they were doing and looked directly at the two leaders in the center of the camp. "Today, according to the prophecy of my mother, the giant queen Omibrella, two twilight dependents from the outside world have arrived in the twilight country." Badhale's voice was very loud, like a blossoming spring thunder, creating echoes throughout the camp. "The prophecy tells us that the war with the eternal night demon wolf will draw to a close under the witness of the two visitors from another world, and the light of twilight will spread across the land. The twilight dependence's tents will be pitched directly into the heart of the night, and that demonic wolf will forever lose its authority. To celebrate the arrival of the prophesied ones, let us pray together and welcome the prophesied ones with delicious manna." After Badhale finished speaking, he clasped his hands in front of his chest, and everyone else followed suit. It was a prayer recited in giant language. Altair was completely confused, and tried to repeat the prayers using his instigator ability, but it had no effect. Repeating it like that won't work. Veneda, seeing Altair's predicament, couldn't help but let out a low laugh. Giant language is a very magical language. It can directly communicate with spirituality, and this communication is achieved through an understanding of the meaning of words. Even if someone who doesn't understand giant language repeats its pronunciation, it still won't work in ritual magic. She reached out and picked up the plate in front of her, handing it to Altair. "You eat my portion first. I hope you can get used to the flavors from our fosak." Altair looked down at the plate. The basin-sized plate held a large piece of light green manna, which, from its shape, appeared to be a roasted meat-like food. Although green roasted meat looked very strange, the taste was surprisingly good. "I really hope Veneda tries this ritual after we go back, at least it's much better than her own cooking," Altair thought as he ate. Veneda was currently chatting happily with the brown elves, seemingly very interested in their skin. The brown elves surrounded her, asking various curious questions. Occasionally a few words of Elven language drifted out, and the rich meaning contained within them made Altair unable to suppress his fantasies. "Not understanding giant language is really troublesome. After I go back, I need to first master my Elven language, and then consider giant language." Altair, unable to communicate fluently due to the language barrier and unable to use his Beander abilities, feared being perceived as malicious and could only eat in silence. Suddenly, Altair heard a melodious and expansive music. Completely different from the strictly metrical classical music favored by Britain, the music was profound and ethereal. Although the details were not as elegant as instrumental music produced by complex mechanical structures, it made every listener uncontrollably tear up. Altair followed the sound. A relatively short giant had finished eating and had taken out a bone-made wind instrument from his arms, playing it passionately. Although his oppressive presence was not as strong as Badhale's, When he picked up that pan flute and began to play, Altair felt as if 1,000 miles of twilight shimmered before him, falling towards him with light specks generated by friction with the air as the melody changed, inescapable and unavoidable. Finally, his spirit body collided with the shattered twilight, finding supreme solace amidst the vast amount of emanating twilight light. Subsequently, more and more giants joined this grand wind instrument concert. Their instruments were not complex, mostly bone flutes and pan flutes. Delicate string instruments like violins and cellos were almost non-existent here. For some reason, Altair even somewhat understood Britton's theory at this moment: some emotions cannot be conveyed by delicate mediums. Whether it was the flow of wind, the energy of fire, the purification of water, or the nurturing of earth, all were silently borne by the profound sounds of the flutes and bone flutes, merging into the never-fading twilight wonder of this country. As Altair listened, he suddenly felt an inexplicable warmth in his eyes, which were, at some point, already filled with tears. He quietly glanced at Veneda, only to find that she had turned her back at some point, her shoulders slightly trembling, and faint sobs could be heard. A group of brown elves embraced her comfortingly. For someone like Veneda, who is in a foreign land, the emotional impact of this song seems to be even stronger. Altair wanted to go over and see, but realized he didn't know what position he should take to comfort her. Just then, he felt someone pat his shoulder. Altair turned around. Behind him was the twilight person named Cleos. The other party placed a hand on his chest, performing a unique giant tribal courtesy. "Respected outsider, the mother wishes to see you. Please follow me." Chapter 45 Omibarella, second update. Asking for votes for promotion. Altair once again followed Clyers through the simple twilight people fortifications made of huge stones and headed towards the Brown Elves' territory. Along the way, the two passed many brown elves. They didn't act unnaturally in front of Clyers, instead, they laughed and greeted him. "You seem to be very popular." Altair hesitated for a long time before finally speaking to him in his not-so-fluent Elven language. "Not bad. The most popular one is, of course, Lord Badhale." Clyers shook his head honestly. "The way we reproduce is similar to that of the Brown Elves. Both rely on both parents praying to the Father God to achieve the spirit fusion ritual. Therefore, our two races can intermarry. The specific race of the offspring is determined by the parents through negotiation, by adjusting the proportion of their respective separated souls. That sounds a bit arbitrary, like a rule set casually to make this world work." Altair outwardly agreed, but inwardly he was already thinking about the corresponding manifestations. If Omibarella's prophecy was correct, then why did Loan ultimately win the war? Altair frowned in thought. In this world, the two outsiders involved in this event are Veneda and I, but in the war outside, who were the two people who played the role of outsiders? What role did they play? Furthermore, to the Twilight Country, Veneda and I from the Loan Kingdom are otherworldly visitors, so to the god of combat, who is a native, where is the otherworld? There are simply too many similar doubts. In comparison, the second and third prophecies are easier to understand. Altair frowned slightly in thought. Sister Vesper saw the scene of twilight falling, which is also a way for twilight to cover the entire land. Moreover, the Fosak army's tents have indeed been set up outside Backland. What's more interesting is the fourth point, which is, the goddess will lose her authority. Altair carefully recalled the recent changes in the goddess church. He remembered that he no longer received a response when using moon flowers as prayer offerings. As a self-taught mystic, he had some understanding of these changes, but he hadn't thought about it in this way before. Could it be that the goddess traded the authority of the moon with the Earth Mother, asking her to betray and ambush the god of combat at a critical moment, which led to the god of combat's demise? Such a somewhat blasphemous thought appeared in Altair's mind, but he quickly dismissed it. The final situation was clearly in the god of combat's favor. The army had already reached Backland. If the Mother God had only cooperated with the god of combat to kill the god of combat would likely not have withheld even the authority of the moon. So why would she betray her nominal son? Additionally, another reason that made Altair's denial even more resolute was Badhile's description of that erosion. Since the mother-son relationship could anchor their consciousness, preventing them from falling into a risk similar to losing control, maintaining the relationship with the god of combat was also something Omibrella could gain practical benefits from. Trust in the power of the gods, but do not trust in their benevolence. Altair silently repeated this proverb in his mind. Even if Omibrella truly didn't care about the mother-son affection, she wouldn't risk damaging her own power to do something that had no benefit. That wouldn't make sense. While Altair was lost in thought, his steps did not slow down at all, and the two quickly arrived in front of a tent with a distinct architectural style. This tent was a dome-shaped structure formed by intertwining vines that grew out of the ground, covered with fruits of various bright colors and flowers that Altair couldn't even name. The matriarch is inside, I won't go in. Clyers nodded to Altair, then turned and left briskly. Altair took a deep breath and stepped into the huge tent. A refreshing plant fragrance wafted over him. It wasn't the specific scent of any single plant, but a mixture of all aromas that brought joy. The giant queen reclined on the huge couch in the center of the tent, surrounded by 12 crystal and tree stump incense burners emitting a delicate fragrance. Between the two of them was a long staircase and a thin, translucent curtain. This curtain seemed to have the effect of isolating spirituality, so Altair couldn't clearly see the person inside, only hearing a gentle and languid voice coming from within the curtain. Even so, the voice contained a well-concealed sense of majesty, making one dare not overstep in the slightest due to her state. A god is indeed a god. Even if this was just an independent mental projection, not possessing the true body's rank, only equivalent to a sequence 4, it still filled Altair, who was already equivalent to a sequence 5 inches guardian, with awe. Hello, visitor from the outside. Before Altair could speak, the other party spoke. Her speaking speed was not fast, but she always managed to take the initiative in speaking just before Altair was about to open his mouth. No need for formalities. Drink this first. A vine suddenly descended from the dome, its tip adorned with a wine glass-shaped calyx, holding a cup of golden, viscous liquid resembling nectar. This is a potion that provides language protection, and it remains effective even after you leave here. Just drink this, and you can immediately master several languages with supernatural powers, including giant language, elven language, and dragon language, which will make our communication easier. The giant queen said gently. Isn't this thing very precious? Is it appropriate to give it to a newcomer like me? Altair didn't take it, but cautiously asked. It doesn't matter. When your strength reaches my level, you will understand that many people are not chosen because they possess some kind of peculiarity, but because they are chosen by everyone and thus become peculiar. Omibarella's voice echoed like a valley, making it exceptionally pleasant to listen to. The more you interact with high-level existences, the more you will know that what abilities you possess, what peculiarities you have, are not the reasons they choose you. Or rather, in a world where all peculiarities come from high-level existences, using whether one possesses peculiarities as a selection criterion is inherently ridiculous. I don't understand. Altair hesitated slightly. It doesn't matter, perhaps you won't understand in the future either. There was an indescribable emotion in Omibarella's voice. In this world, the boundaries between cause and effect are sometimes unclear. All you need to understand is one thing, whether you truly want to figure some things out yourself. That's enough. Altair's expression froze slightly, then he nodded gently, took the cup of nectar, and drank it in one gulp. The sweet liquid slid down his esophagus. In the spiritual realm, something seemed to have changed. Altair felt that a vast amount of complex knowledge had been added to his mind, and he had to concentrate to absorb those grammars and words. When his thoughts returned to normal, Omibarella's voice rang out again, but this time, with a hint of solemnity. Outsider, I have a request to entrust to you. Please, in tomorrow's battle, watch over your female companion. If she does nothing, that's for the best. If she tries to assassinate me, please help me stop her. Chapter 46, Mother and Son. Altair's expression froze, and then he quickly tried to explain, Veneta, she wouldn't. It's all right, I don't blame you. Noticing Altair's fear, Omibarella chuckled softly. Because this is also what I wanted her to do. Rather, if you hadn't joined, I truly wouldn't be sure if I could wait until the day she made up her mind. What is this? Altair was about to ask when suddenly a thought flashed through his mind like lightning. Just now, Omibarella, the Queen of Giants, who existed in the Twilight Country as a memory imprint within the god of combat's spirit, referred to Badhale as he, and this distinction in address does not exist within the concept of the Twilight people. Meanwhile, on the twilight-shrouded hillside, Badhale sat on a massive rock, letting the twilight's glow wash over his colossal body. The grand and mournful sound of panpipes echoed in the deep valley, and his figure appeared incredibly solitary at this moment. After a long silence, he spoke without turning, his voice relatively soft. You've finally come. As soon as he finished speaking, Veneda's figure emerged from behind the rock, standing silently behind Badhale. Mr. Badhale, what can I do for you? Badhale plunged his greatsword into the ground beside him and patted the rock next to him. No rush, let me tell you a story first. After a moment of contemplation, he began in the desolate tone unique to the giant language. Where should I start? You might not know, I'm not good at telling stories, and the giant language doesn't express emotions like the elven language. Then let's start here, Badhale began to recount, his voice like a song from the most ancient times. There is a clear difference between the giant language and the elven language. The elven language communicates spirituality through meaning, so its tones are quite simple, but a single word contains rich meaning, and it can function even with poor timbre. The giant language, however, communicates spirituality through syllables, building spiritual channels by producing highly rhythmic sounds, so even simple declarative sentences have complex inflections. Once, I was born in the giant royal court. My father gave me the strength to fight, and my mother created this land of the Twilight Country. I enjoyed it here, familiar with every inch of the twilight. However, the war with the elves destroyed everything. Father died in that war, and I took over his authority, becoming the ruler here. As he said this, the resolute lines on Badhale's face softened. Veneda could sense the surging emotions beneath that firm countenance. Under these circumstances, as each other's only living relative, my mother and I should have been closer. However, I found that although her abilities and personality hadn't changed, she had indeed changed. She was definitely not my mother Omibarella. I could not bear to maintain a relationship with someone who might be my mother's killer. However, I knew clearly that if I severed this connection, I could be assimilated by this twilight at any moment, completely losing my own will. Badhale clenched his fists, and the twilight's light flickered in his eyes, like burning flames. However, after I collaborated with the demonic wolf to kill the Pale Emperor, I suddenly realized something. Badhale turned to Veneda. Since this woman could be reborn using my mother's remains, then my true mother might not be unable to awaken. But if the impostor Omibarella truly resurrected, could the real Lady Omibarella still successfully revive? Veneda asked, puzzled. She didn't question the correctness of resurrection itself, because in her understanding, gods should not be killed, it was normal for them to be able to revive. Of course, in my childhood memories, there was a supreme being who could do this. But I cannot speak his name. I only remember the gray mist around him, a mystery that even the light of twilight could not penetrate. Badhale's expression suddenly became somewhat excited. And among the people I know, the Pale Emperor could also toy with death at will. So, I cooperated with the demonic wolf to kill him, bringing half a tributary of the River of Light consumption into the domain of twilight to study this. However, the half of the River of Light consumption I had left was not enough. I needed the other half in the demonic wolf's possession. Thus, this war began. Badhale jumped off the rock, bringing his gaze level with Veneda's. I can sense the resonance within you. So, I want to entrust something to you. When this war reaches its end, even if that impostor and I can kill the demonic wolf, we will likely be severely wounded. At that time, I want to ask you to ambush Omibarella. Krelios and the others will create an opportunity for you. Don't worry about the brown elves. Reaction. They are a race created by that fellow from the mud. As soon as Omibrella dies in battle, they will naturally disappear. Veneda's expression slightly hardened. The other party's words carried a hint of indifference towards life, as if the decision just made did not affect the fate of a race, but was akin to a small matter like breaking a vase. Moreover, for some reason, when Veneda saw Badhile's face, which she hadn't been able to see clearly before due to his height, she always felt a trace of grayish-white aura moving across his face, like a startled venomous snake. It seems you've understood a little. I must say, you are indeed a clever person. Omibrella nodded, and Altair could sense her satisfaction. So, the prophecy in this world doesn't refer to Veneda and me either. We are just insignificant witnesses. Altair took a deep breath and asked slowly. Only half right. You are indeed not the people of the prophecy. Rashly intervening in this matter will only make your situation extremely dangerous. Omibrella sighed softly. However, you are not without special qualities. I told you before, in the eyes of the gods, the boundary between cause and effect is not so clear. We choose pawns not because of what you can do, but because after we choose you as pawns, we will grant you the authority to achieve our goals. In other words, perhaps you yourselves have no special qualities, but ever since you were placed on the chessboard by the gods, you have become special existences. Since that's the case, although you've probably already guessed, allow me to reintroduce myself. The curtain was suddenly drawn back, revealing a woman leaning there, her appearance completely different from before. Her face was shrouded in a crimson glow, and Altair couldn't see it clearly. Unlike the ghost Badhale who lingers here, I am the true incarnation of the Earth Mother, and also the progenitor of the Sanguine, the goddess of harvest and hope. My true name is Lilith. Chapter 47, Night Falls. Altair's heart was instantly thrown into turmoil. Unlike the powerful but essentially similar beings in the Twilight Country who gained power through the authority granted by the spiritual world, this was a true divine incarnation, an immortal existence beyond the sequences. His mind became somewhat muddled, wanting uncontrollably to prostrate himself before it, to kiss the dirt at its feet with tears in his eyes like the most devout believer, even though he was not its believer. After a long moment, he finally asked the great being before him in a slightly off-key voice. But in that case, wouldn't choosing someone more powerful be much better than me? No, that's not it. Omibrella, no, now she should be called Lilith, gently refuted. Whether a chess piece is made of gold and jade or stone and tile, their only difference on the chessboard is the role they play. She extended a finger, as white and tender as ivory, and gently traced the silken smooth blades of grass on her couch. Where her finger passed, crimson blood beads seeped out, solidifying into exquisite chess pieces, and the blades of grass intertwined to form a grand chessboard. Whatever type of chess piece you are, you move according to that chess piece's rules. Entrusting victory or defeat to the player is not so bad. A hint of faint sorrow appeared in Lilith's expression. But young people don't like it this way. Badhile's half-brother, my own child, Bredel, the god of glory, tried to break free from these shackles. He constructed the kingdom of glory, attempting to redefine the standards of glory by slandering that one's existence. However, it cursed him, making his body immortal and forever wandering that desolate wasteland. Badhale is not like Bredel. His thoughts are relatively meticulous, of course, only for a Twilight giant. Although he dislikes me and even despises me, believing that I am the murderer of his mother, he still maintains a superficial mother-son relationship with me, calling me Omibrella, and demanding that I help him seize that river. I won't tell you the details. At your level, even understanding the river of eternal darkness itself could cause a curse. You only need to know that I softened my heart and agreed, even though I knew he intended to use the river's power to kill me and resurrect his birth mother, because I also had a little selfish motive at the time. I hoped he could use that power to help his brother escape his cursed fate. Although Lilith's face was shrouded in shadow, her voice revealed an undisguised regret. Unfortunately, both Badhale and I underestimated the river of eternal darkness. It corrupted Badhale, making him more bloodthirsty and fond of death. At the same time, he wanted to use that river to advance further, to kill the Evernight goddess and usurp her authority. However, I knew clearly that if Badhale devoured Ammonizes' divine power, he would definitely lose control and descend into irreversible madness. Can a god also go mad? Altair asked in surprise. Lilith's featureless face now showed an expression more desolate than at any previous moment. Yes, I once fell because of that. Then, the room fell into a long silence. After a long while, Lilith continued. Later, that one's incarnation found me and said that he could help me free Badhale from madness, reduce him to a sequence 2 position, and thus escape the river's corruption. The condition was to cooperate with Ammonizes to kill Badhale, and then that one would help me preserve Badhale's consciousness in the false divine kingdom constructed by this holy emblem. Once this consciousness takes shape, he can resurrect on a sequence 2 angel of this pathway by virtue of his position. So it can be like this. Altair recovered from his shock, marveling at the terrifying nature of the gods. For them, death was not the end. I ultimately agreed. Haha, my own son was cursed by his predecessor, and another son died by his machinations, truly worthy of someone who has completely abandoned humanity. Lilith's voice sounded again, but this time, these few sentences contained anger as if the earth was cracking and mountains were toppling, and Altair dared not respond. At the critical moment when Badhale was fighting the goddess, I plunged the wooden staff into his back. When he finally cried out my true name in disbelief, I felt my state stabilize again. Although it was the last time, it was also the first time he called me by my true name, instead of deceitfully calling me Omibrella. You should be able to guess what happened next. I chose that nun as my favored one, helped her evade the pursuit of the uninformed Nighthawks, and hid in my church with the holy emblem. Her mind is exceptionally pure, even among Badhale's favored ones, she is quite special. Her emotions are directly aimed at Badhale, not the god of combat. Once Badhale successfully resurrects in the church's arch-pastor, she will become Badhale's most important anchor. Lilith stood up from the couch, walked past Altair, and her dark red evening gown gradually transformed, once again becoming the dress made of plants. She came to the wall of the tent, looking out the window. Help me eliminate interference, don't let your companions intervene. I want to try to stabilize Badhale's spiritual body. Although I am descending in the form of an incarnation, my position will still be restricted. If those twilight giants and your companions intervene, things will become very troublesome. I must capture Badhale's complete consciousness to prevent him from losing control after resurrection. But why didn't you choose her, your believer, but instead chose me, a believer of the Evernight goddess? Altair mustered his courage and asked the last question, wouldn't it be better to find a devout believer for something like this? Lilith smiled for the first time tonight. Do you think it's easier for an instigator to persuade a pyromaniac, or the other way around? If I had brought both of you at once, Badhale would have been wary of you. Seeing Altair's sudden realization, Lilith's expression returned to seriousness. Her gaze turned towards the distant sky, where the twilight had somehow dimmed, as if someone had pulled a black curtain, slowly devouring the twilight at the horizon inch by inch. The Twilight Country, which had remained eternally unchanged through long ages, welcomed its first night. Chapter 48, War. As the darkness gradually swallowed the twilight power that had solidified the light, Altair's vision slowly recovered. This was the first time Altair had truly seen his surroundings with his own eyes since stepping onto the land of the Twilight Country, and he was so astonished by the magnificent scenery that he almost forgot to breathe. The Twilight People's Camp was located at the entrance of a valley, with the front of the camp facing the distant, undulating mountains. Half of the mountain peaks were shrouded in crimson mist, and the mountain range cradled a towering, verdant, giant white ash tree. Its canopy blocked out the sun, with half its branches and leaves already decayed, and the other half still enveloped in the twilight's light. Beneath the tree were 3 thick roots, the parts above the ground alone extending beyond Altair's field of vision. One was beneath their camp, supporting the entire encampment. Another plunged directly into a pool of black spring water, from which the darkness surged. The third root, however, had been cleanly severed by a strange force, and a long dead, ferocious skeleton coiled around the fracture. Its fangs, thicker and taller than the bell tower of St. Samuel Cathedral, dripped black venom, forming tiny black rivers on the ground that flowed into the source of the river of light consumption. Ammonizes has arrived. Go quickly and find your companion, explain the situation to her, and resolve all the problems. Lilith seemed a bit impatient. As you wish, Mother Goddess. Altair mimicked the Earth Mother Church's etiquette Veneta had performed earlier, drawing 4 simple symbolic marks on his chest and performing a slightly unstandard farewell present. Then, a dawn-like light emanated from his body, which he then gathered around him, forming a light, thin armor that didn't impede his movements. After his entire body was reinforced, he lightly stomped his foot and vanished from the tent, leaving only the door curtain at the entrance gently swaying. On the outskirts of the camp, the Twilight Giants and Brown Elves were already prepared for battle. The Twilight people, one after another, pulled out giant swords, war hammers, or execution axes, each 2 people tall, from who knew where. Twilight light emanated from their bodies, forming unified styles of armor. The Brown Elves, meanwhile, sat on their shoulders, securing themselves with summoned vines. They then chanted spells in Elven language, bestowing various mysterious blessings upon their companions. Badhail stood in front of his subordinates, holding the greatsword made from the Pale Emperor's snake bones. The brightness of the twilight light on his body had now surged to an unprecedented level. Veneta stood beside him, her expression dark, lost in thought. Lilith, who had transformed back into Omibrella, arrived with Altair before the Twilight Giants' formation. Badhail gave Altair a meaningful look, then nodded slightly to Omibrella. There was no trace of hatred in his eyes. If there had been, it was completely replaced by a longing for the half of the river of light consumption held by the eternal night demon wolf. We have awaited this day for a long time. Since they dared to attack proactively, it saves us the trouble of finding him. Omibrella, please accompany me to meet that greedy demonic wolf. Badhail slashed his greatsword through the air, and an orange-yellow light flew out with the force of the strike, directly hitting the deep darkness in the distance. In an instant, like a stone thrown into calm water, violent ripples appeared on the surface of the flowing darkness, and spirit world creatures filled with the aura of death crawled out of the river one by one. There were resurrected skeletons and vengeful spirits, as well as demonic wolves and winged humanoids, all kin of the Evernight goddess. And behind this deep dark army, a tall woman suddenly appeared in the center of the crowd, as if her emergence had been erased by mysterious power. She wore a layered but not overly complex, deep black gown, adorned with countless sparkling gems, like the embedded stars of the night sky. From her ribs and waist, 2 additional arms extended, covered in short, dark fur. In her 6 hands, 2 held the heavy black scythe, 2 cradled a crimson moon, 1 was empty, and 1 tightly gripped an ancient, golden-crafted ornament. The ornament was shaped like a slender bird, surrounded by wings made of pale flames. Inside its bronze eyes, light layered upon layer, as if forming one illusory door after another. Altair once again felt that urge to kneel. Although this time, due to the greater distance, he was less affected, his will to resist was far weaker than when he had encountered Lilith's projection previously. Because this was the Evernight goddess, or Ammonizes as Lilith called her, and also the image of Altair's faith preserved within the god of combat's will. Even the most impious believer would naturally be at a loss when their worshipped deity suddenly appeared before their eyes. While Altair was in a daze, the warriors on both sides, led by their respective leaders, began to charge. Once the Twilight Giants, nearly 4 meters tall, started their charge, the sound was enough to make one wonder if an earthquake was occurring. They charged without Badhail's guidance, their formation so strict and their movements so coordinated that it was hard not to suspect they were an army controlled by a single mind. More than an army, these giants resembled a swarm of red ants pouring out of their nest. After Badhail unleashed that burst of twilight light, all the giants immediately and uniformly raised their weapons. As they accelerated their sprint, they unleashed hundreds of long-range strikes composed of twilight light. Hundreds of orange-yellow rays of light formed an illusory greatsword in the air. It briefly solidified at its highest point, and then a downpour of twilight rained down, falling precisely into the surging deep darkness. The next second, the stagnant darkness exploded. Shattered skeletons, incomplete spiritual bodies, and rotting flesh splattered like sparks from a firework, and amidst the silent wails of the Evernight goddess's kin, that area was once again filled by the flowing twilight. Just then, a faint shriek echoed from the sky. Countless humanoid creatures with black wings, having found an opportunity after the previous strike, rose into the air like swarms of locusts. They held large crossbows made of white bone, stained with yellow grease, and tiny white fuzz directly sprouted from the grease-stained bones, making one's scalp tingle at a glance. Again, without any command, a black rain of swords, no less imposing than the twilight light from before, crashed down, raising clouds of dust in the Twilight Giants' formation. Chapter 49, Clash. A dense rain of arrows, like a black cloud, enveloped the Twilight People's army, yet it failed to disrupt their formation. The brown elves on the backs of the Twilight People chanted elven language spells, causing the soil on both sides of the army to churn like an invisible plowshare. It then closed overhead, solidifying into a material as hard as obsidian, forming a corridor that blocked flying projectiles. Bone arrows pierced the corridor's roof, their fletchings quivering in the air, emitting a dangerous buzzing sound. Under the brown elves' manipulation, the brown corridor extended forward with the Twilight People's advance, like a foraging earth dragon, biting into the small gap that had just been blasted open at the edge of the darkness. Subsequently, a fierce conflict erupted between the two sides. The first row of Twilight Giants simultaneously plunged their great swords, overflowing with twilight light, into the ground. Accompanied by a cracking sound, countless twilight-like light particles surged from the sword blades, transforming into a hurricane that swept a 50-meter radius fan-shaped area in front of the battle line. The movements of the undead soldiers in that area, who couldn't dodge in time, instantly froze. The moment the darkness, on which they depended for survival, was dispelled, the infiltrating twilight light deprived them of their vitality a second time. They remained fixed in place, holding their white bone weapons aloft, until the Twilight Giants' line charged past, trampling them into shattered bone fragments. At this moment, a faint fragrance suddenly wafted from the depths of the darkness, like the ointment used by uncultured southern continent natives for mummification. This scent immediately overpowered the fishy smell of crushed bones on the battlefield, entering the nostrils of the giant warriors and brown elves in the front ranks. The eyes of the brown elves and giant warriors who smelled this scent instantly became dazed, their actions involuntarily stopping, their gazes blank as they halted their steps, then were knocked to the ground by the Twilight People behind them. Although their twilight armor prevented them from being trampled to death by those behind them, the brown elves on them were often not so lucky. Altair and Veneda's ears were suddenly filled with the dull thud of shattering brown elf bodies. The brown elves' last scream before death seemed to stretch particularly long, causing Altair and Veneda's hearts to tremble slightly. Seeing this, the brown elves in the rear once again sang an ancient song in elven language, their voices mournful, like a cuckoo's cry of blood. As the song began, the depths of the endless darkness suddenly stirred. Countless moonflowers and night-scent grass tore through the shroud of darkness, abruptly growing larger, proliferating wildly, and soon becoming as massive as trees that had lived for thousands of years in a primeval forest, dense and obscuring the sky. These flowers moved without wind, sending another exhilarating scent to the Twilight People in the front, restoring clarity to their eyes and causing the white fuzz that had grown on their bodies to fall off. At the same time, these giant plants also extended their developed aerial roots, tightly coiling around the bodies of the monsters hidden in the darkness. Then, steel drill-like conduits grew from the aerial roots, deeply piercing into the skeletons of the monsters. With a teeth-grating sucking sound, the bone marrow of the entangled zombie soldiers was forcibly extracted, turning into a pile of bone dust scattered on the ground. Altair maintained his movement among the crowd using his assassin's footwork, gradually approaching Veneda. Although his strength, after being enhanced, was no weaker than that of the Twilight People, facing such a scene of two armies clashing, the assassin once again felt at a loss. At this moment, he felt so insignificant. The deep sense of powerlessness he experienced during the War of Faith once again filled his heart, making him want to escape, to leave this terrifying battlefield. However, just then, the holy emblem on his chest emitted a gentle light, dispelling the fear in his heart. Only then did he realize that he had already reached Veneda's side. Even if it was just a projection of a dependent, possessing only a mere fraction of the goddess's authority over calamity and fear, it could still make one's heart almost stop beating from terror. Altair couldn't help but quietly tap his chest 4 times. Then, he swung his bloodletter, severing the head of a charging zombie at the neck. Veneda was currently charging in a relatively forward position in the line, continuously creating pure fireballs the color of dawn. Under the holy emblem's blessing, the fireballs, with their increased blast radius, had an exceptionally terrifying destructive effect. Undead creatures were continuously blown away, the yellow grease on their bodies ignited by the flames, enveloping a large area. Altair came to Veneda's side, slowing his pace to guard her flank, while softly telling Veneda what had happened in Rune, a language no one here could understand. In short, I've told you the situation now, and I've also found out the news about the god of combat that Sister Vesper needed. This should be what the divination statement meant by, do not obey Badhale, but interfere in this matter. Altair spoke quickly, simultaneously swinging his sword in a series of thrusts, forcing back the skeleton soldiers who were trying to ambush Veneda from the side. What should we do now? Veneda quickly scanned the surroundings. The battle had already become intense, and a shallow, grayish-white river had covered the battlefield. However, due to the exceptionally strong twilight light here, its destructive effect was not very good. Nevertheless, new undead creatures eerily crawled out from beneath the less than 2-centimeter deep water. They greedily sprawled on the bodies of the dead brown elves, devouring her still warm flesh and blood. Then, they themselves were pulled back into the river by an unknown force from the depths of the river, transforming into wandering vengeful spirits in the river along with the bloody brown elves. Staying here any longer would be a waste of spirituality. Prepare for the next fire sprint. Once Badhale and his forces begin to besiege the goddess, we'll jump to their side of the battlefield, focusing on diversion to minimize consumption. Altair's eyes flickered slightly. He had made his decision. In this twilight world, although their spirituality could be replenished, it was only replenished with the false spirituality of this twilight country. To give a simple analogy, their original spirituality was like a glass of milk, and the spirituality within the twilight country was like coffee. The holy emblem drew the spirituality from the twilight country and transmitted it to them, where it merged with their original spirituality. Thus, they couldn't actually determine how much of their original spirituality remained. As more spirituality was used, the holy emblem would continuously pour coffee into their spirituality containers. This meant that when they returned to Harvest Church, they would face the danger of losing control due to a significant depletion of spirituality. Number 50 Chapter 50, God War. AI Model, Gemini 2.5 Flash. Chapter 50, Divine War. As the two spoke, Badhale and Lilith, who were charging at the front, had already approached the eternal night demon wolf. Without false pleasantries or blustering intimidation, Badhale dragged his twilight greatsword and charged directly forward, the blade scraping rapidly across the ground, carving a deep, dark red gully. The greatsword in his hand emitted a dazzling light, as brilliant as the last afterglow of a setting sun. Where the crimson light shone, darkness quickly receded, the bodies of undead creatures rapidly shriveled and weathered, and plants growing in the darkness instantly withered. When Badhale swung that greatsword, the sky seemed to decay. Although Altair knew that the one standing opposite Badhale was merely a residual image existing within his remaining consciousness, and not the Evernight goddess herself, otherwise Altair would have lost control immediately from gazing directly at a deity, Altair still broke out in a cold sweat when Badhale raised his greatsword and directly slashed at the eternal night demon wolf. Of course, even the demonic wolf incarnation existing in Badhale's memory was not so weak as to be unable to block that single sword strike. A black great scythe suddenly appeared in the hand of the giant humanoid demonic wolf, adorned with sparkling points of light like countless stars, as if the night sky had been condensed and solidified. The demonic wolf Amananthir11 swung the great scythe with surprising ease, lightly clashing with Badhail. At the point where the two weapons met, twilight and darkness shattered simultaneously. The falling fragments landed on the ground, engulfing all living beings within their range. The shrouded beings either aged and decayed in the twilight or died silently in the darkness. Exaggerated expressive power, Altair quickly assessed the situation. Strictly speaking, both of them at this moment were merely images within Badhail's memory. Although the performance of each move was astonishing, Altair could feel that their actual strength was only slightly stronger than Altair, who was a warrior pathway sequence 5, equivalent to having fully digested his potion with the blessing of a holy emblem. However, the destruction they caused in memory was undeniably real. The rules of this world seemed to have some loopholes. It seems that because of Veneta and my inclusion, the ability levels of the native inhabitants of this world have been roughly locked to the same awkward level as us. This at least prevents us from being completely unable to intervene. Altair rapidly pondered countermeasures in his mind. At this moment, the Eternal Night Demon Wolf and Badhail were already fully engaged in battle. The unspeakably terrifying fragments that splattered out crashed into the camps of both armies with immense force, forcing the ordinary troops on both sides to slow their offensive and focus on evading. This allowed the grayish-white river water to spread across the entire battlefield, eventually converging into a pool at the base of the tree roots where Badhail and the other fought fiercely. The surface of the pool was rippling slightly. As the river water gathered, the color of the pool deepened, and finally, the pool beneath their feet turned completely black, like a jet-black gem. If the previous twilight light froze light, preventing its flow, then the pool of water beneath Badhail and the others' feet now directly absorbed all light. Although both of them rationally judged the pool to be only waist-deep, when Altair inadvertently glanced at the spring, he felt as if he saw a bottomless abyss. The abyss whispered in his ear, preventing him from voluntarily looking away. One negative emotion after another arose in Altair's mind, making him forget Lilith's instructions, forget his and Veneta's purpose, making him numbly and stiffly take steps towards the deep, dark river. In the dark, lightless river, faces of vengeful spirits appeared in defiance of all reason. They wailed silently, entwining with each other, supporting a giant throne of white bones with their incomplete bodies, until they were crushed by the heavy bones, and their illusory flesh collapsed and disintegrated. A pale corpse, long decayed, sat upon that throne, draped in a deep black robe, its face aged, the muscles on its inverted triangular face a bizarre, pallid white. The moment he saw him, Altair completely lost control of his body, mechanically and resolutely stepping towards the river. The wails of the vengeful spirits seemed to have softened. They whispered softly in Altair's ear, gently persuading Altair to join them and bear the throne of the great existence with them. Just as Altair was about to step off the edge of the tree root and enter the deep, dark lake, he suddenly felt a violent pull from behind him, throwing him to the ground. Then, with a series of crisp slaps, a sharp stinging pain came from his face, bringing him back to full consciousness. Veneta, who was beside him, immediately noticed his abnormality and took action. A pyromaniac's spiritual perception isn't high, and moreover, for the level of this river of light consumption, a sequence 7 soul abilities truly couldn't save the river's prey. However, a hunter has simpler and more effective methods. Physical methods. Stop, stop, stop. Altair saw Veneta about to continue and quickly raised his hands to protect his face. I've recovered. Tisk, you recovered so quickly, I wanted to hit you a few more times. Veneta stood up from Altair, somewhat unsatisfied. After this beating, your smashing my house is settled. If you like to settle scores after the fact so much, you might be single your whole life. Altair hissed, taking a cold breath as he stood up from the ground, his cheek swollen quite high. You hit pretty hard. Then I'll just latch onto you, my free meal ticket, and eat for a lifetime. Don't even think about changing your identity to court some noble lady. Veneta said indifferently, but then became serious. Let's talk business. Didn't Mother Goddess say to control Badhail? From the looks of it, even if the two of us go up to assist, it's unlikely we can kill Badhail, let alone control him completely unharmed. As they spoke, the situation on both sides changed once again. Due to the appearance of the black pool, the subordinates of both sides retreated a considerable distance, and even Twilight and Darkness retreated about a kilometer, leaving the giant tree root spanning the middle. Altair and Veneda were at one end of the tree root, while the battlefield of the three divine incarnations was in the middle section of the tree root, several hundred meters away. No, we still have some methods. Altair rubbed his somewhat bloodshot cheek, which was gradually returning to normal under the Guardian's healing ability. Get ready, we're going in. Please give me recommendation tickets, brothers QWQ. As I said before, if you have difficulty with donations, cast a monthly ticket. If you don't have a monthly ticket, cast a recommendation ticket. If that's really not possible, just leave some comments to let me know you're still here. Brothers with tickets, don't hoard them. I'm on a trial recommendation this week and need good results. Chapter 50, Divine War. As the two spoke, Badhail and Lilith, who were charging at the front, had already approached the Eternal Night Demon Wolf. Without false pleasantries or blustering intimidation, Badhail dragged his Twilight Greatsword and charged directly forward, the blade scraping rapidly across the ground, carving a deep, dark red gully. The greatsword in his hand emitted a dazzling light, as brilliant as the last afterglow of a setting sun. Where the crimson light shone, darkness quickly receded, the bodies of undead creatures rapidly shriveled and weathered, and plants growing in the darkness instantly withered. When Badhail swung that greatsword, the sky seemed to decay. Although Altair knew that the one standing opposite Badhail was merely a residual image existing within his remaining consciousness, and not the Evernight goddess herself, otherwise Altair would have lost control immediately from gazing directly at a deity, Altair still broke out in a cold sweat when Badhail raised his greatsword and directly slashed at the Eternal Night Demon Wolf. Of course, even the demonic wolf incarnation existing in Badhail's memory was not so weak as to be unable to block that single sword strike. A black great scythe suddenly appeared in the hand of the giant humanoid demonic wolf, adorned with sparkling points of light like countless stars, as if the night sky had been condensed and solidified. The demonic wolf Amananthar swung the great scythe with surprising ease, lightly clashing with Badhail. At the point where the two weapons met, Twilight and Darkness shattered simultaneously. The falling fragments landed on the ground, engulfing all living beings within their range. The shrouded beings either aged and decayed in the twilight or died silently in the darkness. Exaggerated expressive power, Altair quickly assessed the situation. Strictly speaking, both of them at this moment were merely images within Badhail's memory. Although the performance of each move was astonishing, Altair could feel that their actual strength was only slightly stronger than Altair, who was a warrior pathway sequence 5, equivalent to having fully digested his potion with the blessing of a holy emblem. However, the destruction they caused in memory was undeniably real. The rules of this world seem to have some loopholes. It seems that because of Veneda and my inclusion, the ability levels of the native inhabitants of this world have been roughly locked to the same awkward level as us. This at least prevents us from being completely unable to intervene. Altair rapidly pondered countermeasures in his mind. At this moment, the Eternal Night Demon Wolf and Badhail were already fully engaged in battle. The unspeakably terrifying fragments that splattered out crashed into the camps of both armies with immense force, forcing the ordinary troops on both sides to slow their offensive and focus on evading. This allowed the grayish-white river water to spread across the entire battlefield, eventually converging into a pool at the base of the tree roots where Badhail and the other fought fiercely. The surface of the pool was rippling slightly. As the river water gathered, the color of the pool deepened, and finally, the pool beneath their feet turned completely black, like a jet-black gem. If the previous twilight light froze light, preventing its flow, then the pool of water beneath Badhail and the others' feet now directly absorbed all light. Although both of them rationally judged the pool to be only waist-deep, when Altair inadvertently glanced at the spring, he felt as if he saw a bottomless abyss. The abyss whispered in his ear, preventing him from voluntarily looking away. One negative emotion after another arose in Altair's mind, making him forget Lilith's instructions, forget his and Veneta's purpose, making him numbly and stiffly take steps towards the deep, dark river. In the dark, lightless river, faces of vengeful spirits appeared in defiance of all reason. They wailed silently, entwining with each other, supporting a giant throne of white bones with their incomplete bodies, until they were crushed by the heavy bones, and their illusory flesh collapsed and disintegrated. A pale corpse, long decayed, sat upon that throne, draped in a deep black robe, its face aged, the muscles on its inverted triangular face a bizarre, pallid white. The moment he saw him, Altair completely lost control of his body, mechanically and resolutely stepping towards the river. The wails of the vengeful spirits seemed to have softened, they whispered softly in Altair's ear, gently persuading Altair to join them and bear the throne of the great existence with them. Just as Altair was about to step off the edge of the tree root and enter the deep, dark lake, he suddenly felt a violent pull from behind him, throwing him to the ground. Then, with a series of crisp slaps, a sharp stinging pain came from his face, bringing him back to full consciousness. Veneta, who was beside him, immediately noticed his abnormality and took action. A pyromaniac's spiritual perception isn't high, and moreover, for the level of this river of light consumption, a sequence 7 soul abilities truly couldn't save the river's prey. However, a hunter has simpler and more effective methods. Physical methods. Stop, stop, stop. Altair saw Veneta about to continue and quickly raised his hands to protect his face. I've recovered. Tisk, you recovered so quickly, I wanted to hit you a few more times. Veneta stood up from Altair, somewhat unsatisfied. After this beating, your smashing my house is settled. If you like to settle scores after the fact so much, you might be single your whole life. Altair hissed, taking a cold breath as he stood up from the ground, his cheek swollen quite high. You hit pretty hard. Then I'll just latch onto you, my free meal ticket, and eat for a lifetime. Don't even think about changing your identity to court some noble lady. Veneta said indifferently, but then became serious. Let's talk business. Didn't Mother Goddess say to control Badhail? From the looks of it, even if the two of us go up to assist, it's unlikely we can kill Badhail, let alone control him completely unharmed. As they spoke, the situation on both sides changed once again. Due to the appearance of the black pool, the subordinates of both sides retreated a considerable distance, and even Twilight and Darkness retreated about a kilometer, leaving the giant tree root spanning the middle. Altair and Veneta were at one end of the tree root, while the battlefield of the three divine incarnations was in the middle section of the tree root, several hundred meters away. No, we still have some methods. Altair rubbed his somewhat bloodshot cheek, which was gradually returning to normal under the Guardian's healing ability. Get ready, we're going in. Please give me recommendation tickets, brothers QWQ. As I said before, if you have difficulty with donations, cast a monthly ticket. If you don't have a monthly ticket, cast a recommendation ticket. If that's really not possible, just leave some comments to let me know you're still here. Brothers with tickets, don't hoard them. I'm on a trial recommendation this week and need good results. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.